mourn the loss of thousands of our citizens. I can hear you. I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you. And the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
All right, hello everybody.
Whoa.
I think I'm going to start doing more of those video intros for our beginning of the stream. I like how the one I did for our pre-recorded turned out. I liked how this one went, so I think that'll be a mainstay.
I'll try to come up with something. Maybe you could help me out, but I don't know. How do you play the in the beginning of it? I'm just tweeting it out. I'm very sorry. Oh my god. How do you like program it in the StreamYards? Do you just
so when you do share, you can also just share a video file, and that's how you do it.
Yeah.
So I just make these things into like MP4s on Capwing and go from there. But
I see.
Yeah, that's how I do it. But anyways, hello everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Digital Archipelago. We're on episode 10. Things are going smoothly.
Yeah.
And so, well, welcome. As the title as well as the little bush clip there made you jump there, Peter Young. My apologies. I know the volume was a little loud, but we thought it'd be interesting considering last Sunday was September 11th. That
9/11 that was the South. Yeah.
That we sort of look back. It's been 21 years now. And
whoa,
I know.
I wanted to write a think piece last year, but I was just too lazy. I could have though. But this will be the visual thing, the audio visual think piece. So sorry, I'm amped up. I did a nice workout today on the roll and ride. The full body workout. I'm juiced up, and I'm coming after the black. Oh, I'll get to the black pillars, but go ahead, Prudentialist.
Oh no, you're fine. I'm waiting for you to just go, in real life as against Hassan Piker now. But since you're all juiced up and ready to go, no, I just thought that this would be an interesting
Vader physique. Vader circa 2000 when he went back to Noah. He lost a ton of weight. Probably that Vader when he fought Kenta Kobashi. That was a great run. Sorry, that's just wrestling lore. We need AA on the stream to parse that out for people. But by the way, AA retweeting a certain... Never mind. I love AA. But when he goes under the Christians, I don't know. Something about it. I don't know.
Well, I was hoping to avoid that for the time being.
Our boy Paul Fahrenheit's on the case. That's all we got to...
There you go.
Kayfabe. So, no, I love Academic Agent, man. But anyways, go ahead. I always get you into trouble, I feel.
Oh no. I'm pretty well off, and I'm doing fine with that. I think we're okay.
All right.
But no, I thought that today would be a particularly interesting stream just to cover this stuff. I had talked about it on Substack a year ago, just covering like the 20th anniversary where the thesis that I really took away from it was just like the times have really changed since then. And I feel like you and I have kind of touched on this before in the past where it's like so many people these days long for that like pre-2007 world, before social media, before smartphones and everything. And I think it's just simply because it's the nature of the generation of who can remember and who doesn't remember what happened prior to 2001 in the world that came beforehand. And there was this take by Turnip that really, I thought, stuck out because I'm not too sure how to parse it. But he says, like, the first generation that will really take the time to deconstruct the narrative of September 11th and the global war on terror that followed will be the Zoomers because they grew up with it and they grew up in a time where they can't remember what actually happened, where it's taught as a historical event rather than this perceived and very lived cultural memory. And he says that those will probably be the people that do it. I'm inclined to agree with him because perhaps by having some distance emotionally and both by temporal and other means that they'll probably be the ones to do it because we've spent 21 years now trying to understand how the hell we got to where we are, and I think some people are closer than others in
Mm.
regards to what
Mhm.
had played out. I'm going to try my very best to be on my best behavior for Susan today, but um I thought that was a good take, and I thought that was definitely something to
Yeah.
bring up here.
So you're saying the Zoomers will sort of free themselves of that legacy in a way,
Yeah,
or
well,
no?
I think that's what Turnip was getting at, which is what I
Mm.
thought was really interesting. And
I
I
would say
think,
that one here. No, I'm
yeah,
I'm kidding. I love Ryan Turnip's. I
Turnip's
love Ryan
great.
Turnip's need. So that's
Yeah,
has
he's
he been
perfect
called
for it.
that? He probably
Oh
gets many
yeah,
very.
in more than one occasion have we done that in group chats and stuff like that.
Okay,
So
okay.
you're
He's a good kid. He's a good kid.
he's very good. But I
We'll have
found
him
that
on the show one time.
we should we
Yeah.
should.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, no, I thought that was interesting, and it was kind of funny. The other thing that I definitely wanted to do is like in other streams where we've had, whether it's the two film review streams that we've done,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's the one about teenage apocalypticism, or just the undesirability aspect of it.
Mm.
Today gets to be my therapy session, so
Nice.
buckle
We did
in,
three
kids.
film streams. You remember the Ryan Gosling one?
Oh, that's
Um,
true. And you follow by any chance the Kino Corner on YouTube?
Oh, I'm good friends with the Kino Corner. In fact,
Okay, great.
we're in talks
I've
to
been
do content minded together.
good.
So
I've
yeah,
been thoroughly enjoying his series of videos about why he's literally me characters are so important
yeah,
and good.
yeah.
He recently followed me on Twitter, and I just
Oh,
started
nice,
consuming
nice.
his backlog of content, and it's been
Yeah,
very good.
he's like, okay, I'm not saying this because we're friends. I'm saying this because this is an objective fact. Most video YouTuber reviewers, apart from Devin Stack, total trash. All of them. Well, I mean, cinematography is all right. Like I said, Devin Stack is, of course, our guy. So, but no, all of them are trash. They don't know anything about philosophy. They don't know anything about literature or cinematography, even. Kino Corner is the only guy who knows. He's the only film reviewer you should ever support or give your money to. That is a shoot, as they say in wrestling. I'm not just saying this because he's my friend, but it's objectively true. That is a shoot. So Kino Corner, 100% our guy. Well, I mean, I shouldn't actually say that. It might get him into trouble. But
It's about to
no,
say he's got like
great...
a 75K sub channel. I mean, I was about to say that's
no, he's a great guy. He's doing many great things behind the scenes, even. And there's certain people who attack him, I think, terribly unfair, without getting in naming names. But no, Kino Corner, he's truly one of the best. He's truly one of the best film reviewers. A man who has knowledge of filmmaking. A man who has the mind for auteur cinema. Auteur cinema. And I can't say more good things about Kino Corner. But perhaps I shouldn't, because maybe my endorsement might come with some baggage. But anyways, go ahead, Prude. Yeah, so sure. So
yeah, no, I just thought that his stuff's been really good. But
yeah.
I thought in reference to the previous stuff that we had done, it'd be a good idea to also break
Yeah.
down other cultural factors. And I mean, we've
Yeah.
talked about before how in politics the way that we can perceive one issue is usually a very good indicator of the rest. Our good friend Stain Haynes has a little bit about that in Cars and Women magazine, about if I know your take on Roe v. Wade, then I know your political take on virtually everything else, which you had pointed out a while back. And I think that one of those other cultural milestones and stepping stones that people definitely do base their politics off of is sort of your evolution and your thoughts on the global war on terror and September 11th. Because I mean, I think that was really what spurred a giant wave in return to like the Ron Paul revolution of like 2008 and 2012. Not to say that there wasn't the old paleocon right that definitely was anti-war from the start. There certainly was. I mean, not to drown out or forget the anti-war voices that had started prior to 03. But at the same time, right, I do really think that people's political evolution was spurred on by the consequences of the global war on terror. Like I remember being in high school and, I was getting ready to graduate and all that when the Snowden leaks came out, when Glenn Greenwald had rose to prominence. And it was sort of a really big deconstructing moment for me just to realize like the full extent of everything that has happened in the last like 14 years has been nothing but this absolute centralization of power. Like it was a really big sort of wake up red pill moment for me as a young person, just to be like, oh wow, like the world has gone to shit. And the obviously very clearly for a young man after being raised very much in a sort of like pro George W. Bush household at the time, that like, oh, things are not the way that they should be. And that's sort of the case that it is for me as a military brat. Is a lot of my politics and political evolution has been just sort of the growing up as a kid in a world that was unfathomably just part of the regime and part of how the system operated, and then coming to terms and waking up as a young man getting closer now to his 30s, where he's just like, oh, a lot of the things that you had grown up on are both fabrication, disinformation, and the fact is that the truth is still buried and that you'll probably never get an answer, and what has come at the cost of it, then thousands of lives, hundreds of thousands of civilian deaths, and still untold pain and suffering as veterans of the U.S. continue to lose their lives by their own hands at an uncalculable rate. So it's definitely something for sure.
Well, so I could see why this is a therapy session for you. Now I'm a bit older, so I'm a few months away from 30, as you know. So I remember 9/11 a bit more vividly. But I think that I wanted to talk, like, the human toll, I think, is pretty much an unwritten history, or it is written, but it was sort of buried. I think a theme that we were discussing was talking about the sort of great forgetting that happened during the Obama years, as we've always alluded to. But I think we'll have to expound upon that. Before we get into that, current news. What do you think? It's over, bros. It's over. It's over. Gherkin won, okay? No, I'm kidding. Listen, the blackpilling is totally ridiculous on the Eastern Front with the special police operations. I know. Listen, this isn't just Vatnik Cope, okay? This is not just Vatnik Cope. But my opinion is that I think the blackpilling coming, and I know I'm consciously aware of, if you go to my friend, my two friends that run the War Report, my good friend GSP, listen, I love you, buddy. He's probably watching this. Vehemently disagree. I think that this was a feint. I think that they wanted the strategically more important town of Bakhmut, which they're encircling, by the way. And I think all of this thing that you see about, oh my God, this victory, it's amazing, they're conquering territory. They had to, let me give you some perspective here, okay? The Russians lost nothing, practically nothing, not even their heavy equipment that they managed to get out in time, because they were bleeding out the troops in this area to begin with. By contrast, in the span of 3 days, about 8,000 men on the blue-yellow side were ghosted. YouTube, and about maybe roughly 20,000 casualties, whereabouts. Okay. Now, it is true. I do agree with GSP that they've left these people, and that's another thing that will never get reported in the Western media, is that your wholesome Chungus freedom fighters, they're going to do a lot of persecuting in these areas because they consider them traitors. They consider even, and similar to the Iraqis, by the way, if you go back, so to tie this into current events, they consider selling things to Russian troops to being a collaborator. And they're sending people like the Tornado Battalion in there who are too extreme for Azov, okay? So all the fellas on Twitter, the wholesome Chungoid,
might want to
yellow,
get to your point.
Yeah. Anyways, yeah. So, but I'll never report it because, of course, people in the London media, I'm sure, will be cheering. But anyways, this whole thing about Strudikov, Gherkin, he won and he's right, and it's true that the Russians can't win. Listen, now I'm not denigrating his service, but if you go back to the history of it, Gerkin was dispossessed because he was basically pushed out by the Russians in 2014, and the command of the Donetsk People's Republic was taken over by people like Motorola and Givy. God rest their souls. They were both, ghosted by enemy factions. So anything the Russians do, he was dispossessed for being a mark for himself. So literally, they could take Kiev. They could be surrounding Kiev, and he would still say that they were going to lose. Okay. So the fact that every Western media outlet is now going to Gerkin saying, oh yeah, oh my God, you were right. They can't win. Anyways, sorry. I know this is probably me just coping.
Yeah.
But if we backpill, oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry. What I'm
no,
going
you're
to
just a tad bit too much there, buddy.
Yeah, sorry. I know. Sorry.
We
Anyways,
should probably have a stream perhaps on that conflict one of these days.
Yeah. Don't worry. Anyways, so that's current events. Blackpilling is unproductive. But anyways, let's tie this into our topic. I always love calling him Mark for himself. So anyways, let's tie it into this topic. So the Americans faced, I think, a similar situation in Iraq and Afghanistan around, I would say, when was the big surge? 2007?
2009.
2009. Yeah, that's 2009. Yeah. So
2000, more or less what Barack Obama was like campaigned on, was trying to find a meaningful way out of the war, closing Gitmo, this whole hope and change bit. But you take power, and the first thing that you do is you start going to Lindsey Graham and start selling how to increase troops into the war and all that. It was a delightful way to realize how the system worked.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that Fallujah was 2006,
3-4.
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah. But the big push was in 2009. That was Then I believe afterwards they Gio nearly went off the schizo edge there. Listen, I know I'm probably just coping, but I think cooler heads have to prevail, and we'll see what happens during the winter. Sorry, I know it's, but I think that, but then there was the whole sort of thing about Obama's silent war with the drones, and that they were, that, which in itself was kind of a cope, if I recall. That was like the big cope about, well, we're not going to risk men anymore. We're just going to have this sort of like 21st century model of warfare, which is like done remotely, and some kind of girl boss drone operator in the middle of the Nevada desert is going to replace regular, which I mean was delusional. And it more misery.
And this is the thing about that we talk, and I think that's sort of the meme about the military today is that we see a lot of what's the word I'm looking for? Like, we do focus a lot on sort of the state of the U.S. military now, not the state of the U.S. military then, because definitely met people that operated those things, and those people are just as fucked up as infantry in terms of like what they saw and what they've done. And I mean that also plays into a factor, I think, of one of the few things I wanted to talk about, but I think that comes into really the last 20 years are an important part of more or less how the American political, body politic has evolved and changed to where, there was a staunch anti-war protest throughout 2003 prior to the invasion and leading up to it in 2002 when he was trying to get that coalition together, George W. Bush and co. And, that was like the last hurrah and gasp of sort of the mainstream boomer-esque style anti-war left that had really been the remnants of the Vietnam generation. And I mean, you saw that really on full display in 2004's election between Bush and Kerry, because both were, they're both baby boomers. Well, I don't know, Kerry wasn't, or no, Bush wasn't, but
they were sort of like
in that in-between era, right, being born in the 40s. But like, they both had done their own military service. John Kerry, most famously an anti-war protester, threw his medals away, whereas George W. Bush had been more of his the reserve thing, which of course had its own issues of destroying Dan Rather's credibility.
He was very good at being a linesman in the army, George Bush, if you know what I mean.
definitely a man with many flaws.
Yeah.
But I mean, like the whole 2004 election, a lot of the rhetoric was about how not to treat any of the current engagements in the Middle East, like Vietnam,
Mm, mhm.
or ironically, how not to treat them like the Soviets did in Afghanistan, which
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
lo and behold, right?
yeah. Which they're trying to recreate now, by the way, but that's another again, no, sorry. I know we shouldn't talk about the current uh I think
But
we're
I
getting
mean,
ahead of ourselves actually yet, but
yeah,
we'll go
just a
back to
bit.
9/11.
But I mean, yeah, it's the other thing. It's just like you said, you're a little older than I am, and you have a more distinct memory of it.
Mm.
So I guess
Did
I'll.
John Kerry didn't he throw his medals away? Was it at the 68 Democrat convention, the infamous one?
I think so.
Yeah, yeah, that's what it was. It was the one with the Panthers and the riot police and the Hunter S. Thompson and well, yeah, yeah, that was the infamous Why the Democrats though? I guess because it was Johnson, right? That was the
No,
yeah.
he threw his medals away. He testified before Congress. I mean, he had
Mhm,
done
mhm,
quite a bit. But I mean, at the
yeah.
same time, right? Where was it? Oh yeah, and Michael points out 68 in Chicago was there.
Yeah,
But I mean,
big one.
60, and I mean, this was what the whole time and a point where of course, Nixon had famously had maneuvered things about the Vietnam War to keep things going.
Yeah.
Not to mention, like there was a lot of splits on the war as well, right? The left at the time, I think, were definitely more running a more centrist campaign in '68 than they could have been, despite
Yeah.
the fact that behind them was this monumental wave and change, and running the sort of centrist side of it did not bode well for them, which is why you get a total blowout in '68 as it is anyway, in response from what Nixon was heralding out in regards to the silent majority and all that sort of stuff. But I mean, man,
Yeah.
1968 is one hell of a year to talk about one of these days.
Well,
But
even in Europe, in continental Europe, in France, you had the '68 student riots where, you know, Sartre and Michel Foucault were with the students throwing bricks at the police. Hilarious, hilarious. But it's funny. I was actually reminded by my friend Gifts of the film with Michael Pitt, um, The Dreamers. But that's a pretty degenerate film, actually. But well, maybe we could cover it. Who knows? But yeah, '68 was this very pivotal year in Western history, and I think that I can't think of an equivalent. Maybe well, maybe Obama being elected. I don't know what was happening in Europe in 2008. I forget. I
Well, you
forget.
had the Eurozone crisis kind of hit
Oh
in full
yeah,
force. You
yeah,
had I mean, 2008 is its own special moment. I really do think for the Europeans, and I mean, the Europeans in chat, correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, you get the Eurozone crisis. You get to witness sort of the rise after that crisis, the emergence of a lot of Euroscepticism that really starts to come more into full prominence.
yeah,
It wouldn't be, and I mean, this is really before the um, major amounts of the migrant issue that came in. Of course, you had the
yeah.
issues between Greece and Germany. 2008 also had Georgia and with Russia as
That's
well.
right. Yeah, I was gonna
So I
say,
mean,
yeah,
there's definitely a lot there going on. But I
yeah,
mean, 2008, right, is the big sad 2.0, the Great Depression that we've never gotten over. And recession is such a lovely term for us to not say that we're in a depression because it has such a cultural malaise because of the
yeah,
1930s. But I mean, it's the reason why I thought that. I mean, all those moments do add to this huge sort of cultural and political memory that are going to affect generations from here on out, especially those who remember it. Like, for me, it's a flashbulb memory because I lived in Maryland at the time. My father was, he was enlisted man. He was never an officer. He was never close to anything bigger than that. I'm not a Chloe, I swear to God. But, he was there that day. And so when you go out and about and you're like, oh, you get called home from school and, oh, by the way, your dad's workplace is on fire and you haven't heard from
mm,
him all day. You're like, well, fuck.
yeah.
And I mean, he's alive, thank God, but it's
I but
definitely
but it is
it's
curious though.
it's
It is
definitely something
curious
out
how
there.
how the intelligence wing of the Pentagon got
Oh, the
got
one with the financial and intelligence records after just the day
yeah, yeah.
before, some
I think the forensic
$2.3 trillion were in
accounting
account.
firm, yeah, was there.
Yeah, definitely
Really,
a little
really,
not sus at all.
basically all the crimes of the regime from the Vietnam War to Iran Contra was erased on that day. Very curious. Not to say that we endorse conspiracies on the digital archipelago. Well, I don't know. We did a show
I don't know.
about
We should a whole
Francis E. Tech.
stream on Francis E. Tech.
Oh boy.
So Lord only knows really what we do on here, but I
Yeah.
mean, I'll get it out of the way here. I think that it is blatantly obvious that quite a bit of the actual narrative of what's been told and sold to the American public and the rest of the world is not fully true.
Is that hard to
But
say around your family? I'm curious. Not that you want
no,
to.
no, I
Okay,
don't.
good, good.
I know that plenty
Maybe
of.
at the time it was probably hard to say that
Well,
with
I mean, I was much younger
veterans.
back then. I don't think that, as a more rambunctious sort of like Ron Paul fan, as a teenager, I think I probably
Mm,
would have definitely had said spicier things back then about what we had done. But that's all, again, that's sort of my complicated relationship to like, what does it mean to be like an American? What does it mean to deal
yeah,
with the last 20 years? And sort of reconciling with the fact that all these things that have happened are antithetical to what I believe the country is and what I believe in personally. It's just like, well, shit. I think that's sort of the long time struggle that because half my channel audience is not American because I cover
yeah,
international relations and geopolitics. I have like half that are from the rest of the world, and so I certainly do get plenty of like flack or questions about like anti-Americanism and things like that. So it's always a tough balance to deal with because it's just like, well, I certainly am no fan of what has happened over the last 20 years regime wise, but I'm also note that I'm sort of captive to this regime that has been in place more or less since the 1930s, that has taken place since the
yeah,
revolution came in the night of depression. But it's certainly where we're at now, I think, is illustrative of the fact that there has been a growing sense. And I mean, that was a big thing that Trump also played into in 2016 was
hmm
just the isolationist, the old style of American foreign policy was just to not get the fuck involved anywhere. And it had been the long-standing position to a point where even in World War II, once things finally had happened and FDR got what he wanted, that it took a draft really to change public opinion and persuasion on wanting to get involved abroad, especially in Europe, at least. I mean, hell, it was only a few years prior to the start of World War II where you had much more public and well-backed elites that were supportive of the other regime at the time in the mid-century. So, I mean, it's just is indicative of how
yeah.
different American
Goldbug is
politics
right
were.
about that. The Bolsheviks pretty much had a huge grip, like stranglehold on pretty much all of American cultural life and even the foreign offices of the regime. Like, I mean, FDR. I don't think FDR was a communist, but I think that, well, maybe who
Oh,
knows?
he was, well, I mean, the more I read Stalin's War, the more I just thought, like, oh, no, he totally is.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
just couldn't believe that, at all whatsoever. Just like, okay, that, and of course the FDR's government was either completely infiltrated or willingly infiltrated to a point where even Stalin knew about the Manhattan Project, and it just
yeah,
illustrates that I don't think American OPSEC has gotten any better. Well, because I mean,
there,
I think about the
yeah.
Soviets back then, and now I'm just thinking about, oh, well, we have Hollywood placate for the Chinese. We get in trouble all the time with Confucius centers and espionage. It's like, oh man, the more things change, the more they stay the same.
My office was when I was a TA. My office was in a Confucius Center, so, um, but yeah, I mean yeah, huge statue of Confucius, a green emerald statue. Um, but yeah, no, I think that this plays into, I mean, the historical implications from 9/11, even before, you could say, like with World War II, the history of the 20th century, and sort of 9/11 being a closing factor in the 20th century, being really a sort of, well, we've been saying like last week about the death of Queen Elizabeth being one of them, but really, truly, 9/11, I feel did rupture sort of the time wave in a way on the stage of world history. I remember reading this article about these news stories that were leading into the months before 9/11 in the summer. And they had one about some Olympic Games, some runner won something, a consolidation of the Taliban in Afghanistan, which is another thing too, is that during the 1990s, we didn't care about Afghanistan anymore. And the Taliban really sort of came into their own. And it was only until the mid 90s with, was it the mid 90s, the creation of the Northern Alliance, or afterwards? Um, and that region, there was, moves being made, and even the sort of like genealogy of the hijackers and where they came from has been it took years to realize that most of them were from Saudi Arabia and other places that had very curious connections to certain intelligence organizations in that region of the world, especially the one in that one nation in the Middle East. But anyways.
Well, yeah, I mean, the Northern
Yeah.
Alliance started in officially like 96 and
Yeah.
more or less
Yeah.
made its conclusion after America had finished its invasion in 2001 by the time they
Yeah.
wrapped up their business.
There were some members that were still around, but they
Well, yeah, I mean, they played
they
a
were
role in
decimated at the
parts
time.
for
Yeah.
they played roles for both sides in a lot of that regard. But I mean,
Yeah.
it does illustrate, I think, a lot of our yes, George Sagan, we know.
Let me see this guy.
It's a good tower.
Yeah.
There you go. There you go.
That's a good
But
tower right there.
we'll try our best though to keep it a little tame.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the other thing too is that, and that's the other thing. And I'll start off there to be more of the Matt says more things about himself than he should. But like the reason why I picked that clip at the very beginning as the show's introduction for this one is because you look back on 20 years of everything that has gone down, all of the lies, every bit of propaganda that you were sold on as a younger person, and then coming out of this haze and just being like, wow, all that bullshit, huh? But then you hear that, or you look back on the day and then you're just like, well, it's still very real. It's all very much happened. This is all very visceral. Nearly 3,000 people had lost their lives. And it's just now, today in 2022, I have foreigners in the United States House of Representatives adding the hijackers as victims when they commemorate the day that it actually happened. Like,
whoa,
disgusting animals that they are.
Man.
And I mean, this is the time where war fever really did come alive after 9/11. I mean, it was higher than any other time before in human history. Because, I mean, you had an unprecedented level of peace that had came in the decade prior where, the Cold War had ended. There was this sort of 10 years of America fighting wars. I mean, throughout its entire history outside of the War of 1812 and the American Civil War, where nothing had ever happened on U.S. soil, period. I mean, the most damage that had ever been laid waste before had been laid waste by American hands. We'd done more damage in Sherman's March to the Sea than we had ever done, from the losses in Pearl Harbor. And so now, you get this attack on a very public way. The two most iconic buildings in the New York City skyline at the time, outside of maybe the Empire State Building.
Yeah, probably Empire State Building is the only one I could think of.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I think so. And so those are gone. And then, the Pentagon and then what happened, of course, the Pennsylvania Field. So you get an attack on everything, just like the civilian population centers, of course, these areas and towering amounts of capital, which of course throws into the ongoing logic and personification of anti-Americanism and global capital that definitely came out of anti-American sentiments, not just the Middle East, but definitely all other parts of the world. And it's what you have to combat with is a very visceral, emotional feeling of what's still very raw, I think, for a lot of people who were close to it. And then comparison to the fact that the last 20 years has been more or less sifting out of the bullshit and trying to make sense of what's actually happening and what's going on. And it's funny because I was reading, I looked up when I did the Substack for the 20th anniversary last year. I recall looking up newspaper articles about what were the politics of the day at that time. And it was stuff about campaign finance. It was stuff about the Middle East. It was stuff about stem cell research and genetic editing and the pro-life stuff.
Terry Schiavo,
all that stuff. And
she died, right? She's dead now.
I have no idea. Actually, I think so.
No,
but
in Canada we had Robert Latimer. That was our version of Terry Schiavo. But did you know about that case?
A little bit, not enough.
Where he redacted his own daughter, who was and they freed him recently or a few years ago or something. Yeah. Anyways, yeah.
But yeah, no. So I mean, just like
what else was in the news cycle apart from culture war, like Bill O'Reilly? No, that was after though the heyday of Bill O'Reilly. That was after 9/11, but before, leading up to it. I mean, what were the major issues during 2000 during the election? Was the Was it just basically like the Clinton years? Is that like the
Well, I
aporium
mean,
of
yeah, I mean, Bush
yeah,
did run a campaign sort of tying Al Gore to Bill Clinton's character.
yeah,
I mean, I think Bush had remarked at some point in time that when Al Gore announced his candidacy or whatever, like the long shadow of Clinton or whatever still
yeah.
stands here. Um, and also at the same time, right? There
The
was also,
long shadow of Clinton.
I mean, not to mention 2000 is filled with of course, the contentious election that had definitely happened there. And
Yeah,
so, I mean, that's the other thing that comes to mind. But I mean, the international relations aspect, foreign policy was also a huge part of the election, not
yeah.
just the cultural issues. I mean, and this was at a time where, by the greatest of ironies, that George W. Bush ran in 2000 against nation building and was
Oh
against sort
my
of the
god.
prolonged,
Because they followed
long-standing
Somalia,
investment.
right? That was another
Well,
thing that
yeah,
crumbled.
Somalia definitely played a big role in it. And
Uh-huh.
again, this is why, like, if you really want to understand, like, the baby boomer politics of how, like, the early 2000s were, you have to conceptualize everything through at least some lens of the Vietnam War.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
because, once the really big, heavy hitting complaints, when, like, the public opinion of the war started to change, not just in Afghanistan, but also Iraq, or they started calling things Vietnam, that's when you really needed a narrative shift pronto.
yeah.
Um,
hmm
and I mean, we definitely did see that,
I think
more so once Obama got into office.
an interesting thought experiment would be imagine if the Middle East wasn't the area of contention, but rather America stuck to military operations in Somalia or in North Africa for 20 years. I wonder what that would have done to American domestic racial culture war issues. I wonder if anyone have thought about that. Oh man, that would be terrible. Actually, that would be. Oh my god, that would be terrible. Maybe it'd be worse now. No, it can't get any worse. What am I talking about? What am I
Well, I
talking about?
mean, the
But
1990s had all sorts of issues, not just Rwanda. I mean, you have
yeah,
Somalia,
Rwanda.
the
Yeah,
Rwandan
yeah.
genocide, the other
hmm
issues in regards to, like, I mean, just it was a time not just in Africa but all around.
Oh,
You had all,
Balkans War, bombing
yeah, no,
Belgrade was
the
yeah.
Yugoslav, yeah, what happened in
hmm
Yugoslavia, the Darfur incident, like all these things that
The
just sort of
restructuring of
culminated.
Russia, which I mean
Yeah, I mean, it's still
nowadays is
we're
yeah,
still, yeah, also
yeah.
don't say it'll ever get worse. The Black Hawk Down situation, which happened
hmm
in Somalia, like all these
hmm
things, right, made foreign policy a huge part of. I mean, the Middle East was still in the news because this wasn't the first time that the World Trade Center had been attacked. In the
Right,
1990s, it
right.
was also bombed,
Yeah.
which was met with, a much less, that was, remember, okay, do you remember how the West Wing always had that sort of very, I don't want to say it's gay or cringe, but like it was a recurring sort of motif
Oh, they were
out of,
running?
yeah, that's a running one, that they had out of, what's the word? It
No, I
was
mean they
president.
were running in the show. It was like
Oh
if
yeah,
something was important, it's like, oh, running down the hallway.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
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 But also, that the other issue was the president Bartlett, right? He would always ask the question like, "What is the virtue or value of a proportional response whenever something happened?"
Oh yeah.
And I mean, the show was still running when September 11th had happened, and so they had a whole episode sort of talking about that and what the world was like afterward, and this like fictional
I think I
presidential
remember that.
administration.
I remember that episode. I didn't watch The West Wing that much, but I think that was a big news that episode because it was directly tied into like the machinery of government. I mean, listen, Aaron Sorkin's a hideous ghoul in my opinion, but like that was they had to do that
But at
episode.
least he could write at
Yeah,
the
at least he could
time.
write. Yeah, at the yeah, yeah. Billions is sort of. I watched the first few seasons and I've lost interest. But
Oh, I gave up once I started when he did the newsroom.
oh god,
Because that was,
oh the Reddit speech from the
if you ever
newsroom.
want, if you ever, there are two things about the newsroom that I cannot stand. That really cringe speech that they had,
Yeah,
the main character do about why America's not great or whatever, and then the other one
thirty
about,
percent of people believe in angels, like or
yeah,
whatever.
I
Yeah,
know.
yeah,
But like it's the other thing was the issue in regards to, he also did the one about like, the Tea Party being the American Taliban or whatever, and I was just like, all
yeah.
right, buddy, I'm out, like fuck this,
Because
I don't
that
want.
really is the voice of technocratic America that I think Obama really embodied. I think that America becoming this like secular liberal technocracy is probably, I mean, would you agree, Matt, or was that like the vibe during the Obama years, or was it something? I mean, there was sort of like cultural chauvinism. I mean, I'm actually almost done this article about well, it was inspired by the Lauren Southern thing, but it goes all the way to the early internet and how the E-right is much older than we think, up until the Bush years, then Obama with the Tea Party, then Obama with the Tea Party. And I wrote about how sort of like during this time, how culturally he sort of like kept winning and winning, and they got sick of winning, and then they won some more. So but even like in terms of government, I mean, even the wars themselves were sort of like the impartial voice of like technocratic control was now going to be like the real thing, even though more American troops lost their lives under Obama than even Bush, if I recall. So
well, the other thing too,
yeah.
right, was just the absolute deluge of just the media playing into it. And
Yeah.
I mean, what comes after this was the TV show 24, which is,
yeah,
if anyone can remember that, I mean, that was definitely something that really just changed the American psyche of like conditioning people to know that there are Kiefer Sutherlands out there that are constantly never going to the bathroom, constantly chasing and shooting people to make sure that you can shop till you drop. Or in 2002, right? That's when the Sum of All Fears came out.
Oh,
and
yeah.
that's when you had the question about like, oh, these like radical, third party guys that are going to do whatever they want. And we're going to go like, nuke Baltimore or whatever. And I just, playing into the absolute state of fear. And like, I do think that 24 was like predictive programming, or at least
a lot of these shows
conditioning people to accept the fact that, oh, by the way, there's evil people out there. You need to ensure the abandonment of all things. And I mean, the other funny thing too is that because like Law and Order SVU has been on for well before September 11th. And I remember, like, when did it start running? 1999. So okay, right before. And I remember one of the episodes circa 2000, or actually 99. It's one of the like first two seasons. They have an episode.
Yeah, did they have Stabler?
Killings.
They had Stabler still at this time.
Yeah, and I mean they had and they did a whole episode about honor killings in like Afghanistan.
Oh, I remember that one. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just I was like,
in Canada, you know what, they modeled that one, the Parvez case here in Canada. That was the big
Enlighten
one.
me.
Okay, so I believe it comes from Toronto. Her father honored redacted her, and it was Eska Parvez, that was her name. And I believe she started wearing makeup. She went to a school district in Toronto. Is it Toronto or Vancouver? It was Toronto, I think. It was Toronto. And they modeled the whole episode basically off of her case. And this was when, like, even like on the political left, anti-Muslim sentiment like was implicitly tolerated. Although in Canada, I will say that for what it's worth, in terms of culture war, what happened after 9/11 and the fact that Jean Chrétien refused to go into Iraq, we then later went into Afghanistan. The big case was over Omar Khadr, where his plight became like this other sticking point for Canadian anti-Americanism. Now, my opinion is that yes, it's BS that they didn't give him a due process or a due trial, and Gitmo, of course, was a huge black hole in terms of legality. But then, like, the fact that they brought him over here and the Canadian government gave him like millions of dollars in taxpayer money, and they had like the media was calling him the child soldier, and he, showed pictures of him at the Toronto Zoo in the early 90s with his family, even though his father had ties to Al Qaeda. I think it was truly disgusting. And, you have to realize he ended the life of an American medic, and but anyways, the case that they modeled was on the Toronto Eska Parvez case, and the whole issue with like Muslim culture war and Samuel P. Huntington's thesis, that was another thing that was sort of like given a rebirth at this time. After 9/11 and during, it was a very, very weird time in terms of domestic, culture war politics. Because of course, as we know, the Tea Party was the sort of abandonment of the Bush era neoconservatism in a lot of ways. But yeah, before again, I think we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's talk about 9/11. Actually, the sort of I think there's a spiritual significance to it. There was that book. I know it's a bit crazy, actually. You know that book, 9/11 is a Mass Ritual?
Yeah.
Yeah. Me and actually our good friend Impossible Princess and her forthcoming Content Minded, we talk a little bit. She wants to write this article actually about how if you go to any like kitschy like tourist shop run by immigrants in New York City, they have like 9/11 memorabilia that is in some ways is like garish, and it's like this almost ritualized thing. But so anyways, what is your I'm curious because you're younger than me. What is your memory? But yeah, sorry, you were getting to something about the honor killings thing. So
well, yeah,
sorry,
but I was just saying that like the entire media did its whole get America into wartime programming as soon as possible. And I mean, I also got really
even on Monday Night Raw, they had the debate between Scott Steiner and Chris Nowicki.
You had a series of debates, of course, all over in regards to like in regards to all sort of like, you know, Comedy Central entertainment. Every night show host at the time had some sort of talk or conversation about, I mean, even popular you know, sitcoms at the time and other like comedy shows had to talk about it. I mean, there's like in the first, it's around 2003, it's like the second or third season of Scrubs of all places also did like 2 or 3 episodes talking about the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, because they had some guy in there with an injury, and it got everyone to talk about it and sort of poke fun at the fact that you know, no one ever remembers or no one ever really knows what the hell they're talking about, because I mean, that was also another big part of it too, was just like, you know, country music had gotten its throwback because, you know, George W. Bush and sort of this was like middle America ready to go to war.
Yeah.
You had the Dixie Chicks essentially canceled by middle America for not wanting to go to war and not wanting to stand with George W. Bush.
Oh, you mean the Chicks now?
Now they're the Chicks.
Yeah.
Because they've rebranded themselves to be more PC.
The Dixie, oh my God, the Dixie Chicks thing. But then later on during the war, there was a huge revival of protest music. In metal, I know that well, you know, bands like Rage Against the Machines, System of a Down was like huge at this time. Albums like Toxicity, you know, talking directly about, you know, the war and the prison industrial complex. And even like, you know, I was actually re-listening to I know they're kind of like libs, but the Lamb of God song Contractor, like the one line, it is amazing. How's it go? Like a glass parking lot in the American Dream. Yeah, I'll look up the lyrics for you, Prude, but we'll get to that. We'll get to that because I feel like we're skipping over 9/11. But
oh, I mean, we're all over the place just because I feel like you can jump from one place to another because it does just it points everywhere.
Kron kicks, because this is that's one of my things. The Chris Ott video on the disintegration loops.
Oh, we talked about that a while back on another episode.
He was right though. I mean, the fact that like New York hipsters. Like, okay, I like Basinski as a musician. I really like the disintegration loops as a fan of ambient music myself. But yeah, I agree. The story's kind of bullshit. Like, oh, I was there and I saw it and it roll off the tape deck, and it's like, bro, you literally just retconned 9/11 into your ambient music. Like, that was, for those who don't know, disintegration loops is the famous magnum opus by William Basinski, the ambient musician, where he claims that he saw the Twin Towers falling, and that morning he forgot a tape loop on the deck, and the physical score of the music was disintegrating his machine, and it produced a lot of this like reverb and washed out effect. And so he has these pictures done by a photographer artist of the smoke, the smolder of the Twin Towers. And it is a really great album in terms of ambient music, but the whole story behind it, that he was there and he witnessed it and it rolled off the deck and it was sort of like spiritually significant to 9/11. Like, I think that's kind of like shameless marketing, but like, yeah, there was a bunch of controversial things. The 9/11 mosque, that was a big thing.
Yeah. The Ground Zero. Yeah, I think
The
that's
Ground
what
Zero mosque.
the
That
Ground
that
Zero
came
Mosque. That came
Yeah,
later. What, around
came
10 years
later.
afterwards?
Yeah, and did you read my thread on 9/11
No,
recently?
I did not. I took a Twitter break this
Oh,
week,
that's
so
right. I'll send it to you. Basically, I talk about how the very first public event after 9/11 was Thursday Night SmackDown, and Vince McMahon goes out there with all the stars right next to The Rock, and gives this big speech about like, we're gonna go and get him, and you can look this up. And I say how very much in the style of Academic Agent, I talk about how the sort of the significance of that being how the kayfabe of the past 20 years from 9/11 onwards, how there was a sort of like seismic rupture in, I guess you would call, the hyperreality of the American century, and how hyperreality was sort of realized in 9/11 in a lot of ways. And in the book 9/11 is Mass Ritual, there was a talk about this, how the sort of public displays of real suffering to people that very much are a part of um, American life, and the fact that they would play these gratuitous videos of the jumpers. And like, I remember that one video they played on national television of that, what was his name? Kevin Cosgrove. Do you know that one, Kevin Cosgrove?
yeah.
Where he was in the building, and right before it fell, imagine like hellfire falling down upon you. Um, oh shit, and the phone went blank, and like, just like the notes from 9/11 in the museum, where people would write down and they would come down from the towers and people would pick them up, and now it's in the 9/11 museum. They would say RIP to my loved ones, blah blah blah. Like, just really horrific, almost like public Gerardian ritual that was going on. Like, I remember watching videos on 4chan of the jumpers. One of them, I believe, what's it called, like LOL Superman or something, where it was a jumper and then you like see their body disintegrated right in the ground. This is totally not going to get monetized, but this, like, seeing their body, and the fact that they would aim, because there was that concert, the Summer Series concert they would have, and they would aim for the pavilion tent, and it just like, they would play this at national television repeatedly. That image was the most of the second tower falling, was the most played image in human history. Like, so let's go to 9/11 story. So you go first, and then.
Well, no,
I
the one
remember
thing I
part.
wanted to say though is that you mentioned how
Yeah.
how they all replayed it, and I mean, someone had done
Yeah.
a study about it, and I wish I had it more on hand, but I recall that someone had done a study about like how that effect was on children at the time, seeing the news in school and everything like that, and
Oh yeah.
a lot of them thought like, oh, this just kept happening every day, to
Yeah.
where they just
Yeah.
thought that this was a continuous event that went on for weeks on end, and that more buildings were falling.
Yeah.
And I mean, just an unquestionable amount of the fact that unedited on every news channel, just there. That was another thing too, is just the rawness of it all. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, there's that famous photo from like Desert Storm that the photographer won, of like the guy that's burnt out in the car that they had hit with an explosive.
I did a
And that,
painting about that.
yeah, and I mean,
Yeah.
they're talking about like, oh, how many of like this is how it
Remember
actually looks like.
it was like, remember that? Yeah, that
Yeah.
was the one. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
now, the news was just play it all the time,
Yeah.
24/7, make sure that you don't bother to repeat yourself.
He won a
Um,
Pulitzer for that, by the way,
he
if I
did win a
recall.
Pulitzer for it,
Yeah.
but I mean, it's not the stuff that that you see people talk about these days.
No.
Whereas now, the internet, of course, has made that so much worse. But in 2001, just to see the news play raw, unedited, bloody footage, I mean, definitely something different from what would evolve.
You can go on Telegram now and find footage. Like,
Oh yeah,
like, it's funny, all the pro-Kremlin ones, like Intel Slava Z, like they always have a way of saying it, like Russian artillery sends Ho back to Bandera. It's like, oh my god, oh, it's terrible. Like, yeah, it is. Like, in some ways, we don't even think it's real. Well, it's back in the day when you see grainy footage of like American troops getting blown up. You know that one where they're going off into the distance and they all of a sudden get blown up by an IED. Like, that was a. You remember that one?
There's a lot of footage like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, back in the day, I think the whole WikiLeaks thing that brought that to public consciousness, like collateral murder, was the big one. That was, that the American public, I think, even during Vietnam, did not see a lot of that footage that was shown later on in documentaries of like field reporters. Because in Vietnam, they would just, if you were like a student reporter, they would like, oh, you want to go to Vietnam? Yeah, go ahead. Like, that's what I believe, what was his name, Michael Herr, when he wrote that famous book, Dispatches, I believe.
Yeah.
He said, like, I was in college and I was in a plane that went like I was in a helicopter that went down. It was just like normal. Like, it was, but then later on, after in the 70s, they sort of like clamped down on information. But no, the American public was totally not like, I remember when I was a kid, this might have been 2003, and me and my cousin, who almost except for one, all my cousins are older than me. They're all Gen Xers. So she's my oldest cousin and she's my godmother. So I was waiting for her. We were about to go for dinner and she was taking a shower. And I remember just flipping through Time Magazine back when Time Magazine was important. And like right there were pictures of Abu Ghraib. It's like, whoa, like, I was like, I want to say I was born in 92, 2005 or 2003 was maybe like 12 years old. And it was like, it was there, like the Abu Ghraib pictures and like dead troops. I remember dead troops. There was another one. And I think like the American public, it was 9/11 really kicked off, I think, an era of hypermedia that is sort of like nowadays it's sort of mundane because everyone, goes online and you could go to like I said, you go to Telegram right now and you could see dead soldiers and it's, you could see bomb runs. But back in the day, that was like on news all the time. Like, I remember this. It was literally for that few months after, up until December, I think, that's all you saw was 9/11, 9/11, 9/11. Like, that was the jumpers. And especially when the falling man became a huge story, who, as we know, was a chef on the Restaurant on the World. What was it called? Restaurant of the World?
I couldn't tell you.
Yeah, like, you know the one I'm talking about, the hangman. And this was a time where there was a bunch of schizo conspiracy theorists online in those original forums about like how he was like the hanging, like the hanging man in what saint got hung that way? Upside down? St. Paul?
Peter, I believe.
Peter, yeah.
Paul was beheaded.
Paul was beheaded, that's right, yes. And there was a bunch of like the schizo conspiracy theories and loose change came out. Like, this was anything you could talk about now in terms of the sort of like hyper real, like media reality we're living through with social media. The roots of that were basically 9/11, in my opinion. I mean, stuff before the 1990s, but I think like in terms of how we approach these events, 9/11 for millennials, especially older millennials, that was I think the crafting of it. But anyways, I'm just
well, no, I mean, all of that plays a major role into what we're doing here. And I mean, there was when it was going down, there were still image boards and forums like this talking about it. And there was, and this was one that I had cited last year, but it was and I'll just quote it verbatim, not to belittle the significance of these events, but you do realize this means a whole slew of anti-terrorist and probably anti-violence laws are going to be passed through Congress. Any anti-terrorist laws will be given almost a blank check to do what is necessary. I'd be surprised if in 6 months you'll be able to make a domestic call without being monitored. That's the way terrorism works. It's not the attack that hurts the most. A couple hundred people will die. Every death is tragic, but the truth is the real tragedy will be a loss of freedoms for the survivors. And that came out the day of, just as events were unfolding.
Wow.
Which, I mean,
who wrote that?
It's just some random poster.
Oh my God, where'd you find that?
Someone had posted last year, like, what image forms and what the internet was talking about on that day.
Whoa!
And I thought that this was definitely something that was worth mentioning. But I mean, also,
did
like,
you
right
watch
after,
the Alex Jones clip, by the way, from the day?
I sure did the other day. I did.
I watched. There was this. Oh, I keep cutting you off. I'm very sorry, but really quickly though, there was this the day of. They used to have it on YouTube. I think you can still find it. The day of 9/11, they have the original 3-hour Alex Jones broadcast, and people, the guy who uploaded it, spliced clips of all around New York and 9/11 that day, of like the dust in the apartments and like how the shopping center underneath the subway looked, and how I remember reading this one account from this guy whose son was in the Twin Towers who died, and he was a techno musician, and how like he was on the subway that day, and it's almost like he could feel his son in the dust, and how like the dust itself, by the way, there was almost like a metaphysical dust around New York. There was almost like a feeling from that year onwards where, and as we know, the carcinogens that were present, all of the first responders getting cancer because the American government did not provide them masks, and and so Alex Jones, he talked about it that day, from the day on, like literally from the moment it happened, he talked about the typical Alex Jones take on 9/11. If I don't know if you could say it on YouTube, whether it was planned or whatever, but it's very surreal, I think, to see media from that time and what people were talking about, because even me being an older millennial, you still forget I was still a kid, right? I was in 4th grade, so anyways, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, I just I mean, yeah, and it's crazy to think about when all this had started, right? I'll read a little bit from what I wrote last year. It says the wars that began after the September 11th attacks, with most households having landlines and dial-up internet, to conclude in a time where 5G is being unveiled and instantaneous access to the world is a technological marvel being taken for granted, to a point where the European Union has just about declared it a human right. The immediate sense of patriotism and unity between various groups in the world's largest multi-ethnic democracy would soon dissipate by the second term of George W. Bush. But and that's the other thing too, is that he was simultaneously this Machiavellian evil guy running things, or the stupid puppet of Dick Cheney and everyone
the
else.
Monkey, yeah.
And all those pictures of George W. Bush is like the everyone does the Putin monkey banana meme, but like George W. Bush was the first. Funny how that died when Obama was running. But I just remember Will Ferrell playing George Bush in SNL. Does everyone remember Robot Chicken making fun of him when they got started all the time? It's just to me, it all sort of just breaks down the absolute craziness of where we are. I mean, I think that there were probably, and again, I'm not going to go full schizo or full. This is not the platform to do it. If I wanted to talk about those things, I'll do it on Odyssey, and maybe one of these days I
see
will.
Charlemagne in the chat.
Yeah. That's partially why I will stay clear of what I personally think of all that, because I don't believe any of it in the slightest. We have the report leaves out plenty of things that we're still. Clearly that there's still parts of it are still classified with regards to the Saudis. And I mean, Trump tried to get them declassified, and he somehow got procedurally outturned by the bureaucracy to say no. The congressional, I know Rand Paul has tried many times to get it declassified as well. Yeah. And it's just like, well, there's so much that I refuse to believe. I don't believe really a cent of the official narrative.
I'm more of the opinion they probably let it happen, to say the least. But that's
well, yeah, and I mean, they also, I mean, it definitely does. Like this, Chronix points out, it does gaslight you to be schizophrenic.
Oh yeah, definitely, especially because of that other one that fell on the same day. That was. Can you even say it on YouTube still, or maybe?
Let's play it safe.
So let me read you the lyrics from Lamb of God, Contractor. The one line is just mwah. So this is about private military contractors. So quenches thirst with Blackwater Horizons, executive outcomes on a burning horizon. So executive outcomes was the first corporate private military contractor in South Africa and Rhodesia. Let's see, where is it? Yeah, motherfucker, let's take a ride. Running red lights in the green zone. Someone's got to die. It's just nothing to see, so load the dice, please. Then it says, and this is, I love this line. Ours is but to do if ours is not to reason why. Ours is but to do if the pay grade's right. Black liquid assets. Fuck the Mujahideen. Paint their picket fences red with the American dream. Lay the hammer down. Get the job done right. Jacked up and clocked into a firefight. Which is crazy. I remember watching those documentaries of the private military contractors, where it's like literally that's what it was like. It was like you had a corporate job where you had these like lavish barracks where you got your ice cream a machine, and it's like imagine like your job is war, but you treat it like a 9-to-5 career. Like something so incredible about that. And no wonder like during the Obama years there was this big complaint about the what do they call it? You probably know, being a military brat, the military brain drain. Remember that one? Where it's like, why would I fight for the USM when I could go to Blackwater or Triple Canopy and get way more pay for way less work? I might not die as quickly. Like the whole structure of corporate war. Like they had videos on Democracy Now! Of American Marines getting resupplied and fighting right next to like plain clothed military contractors. Like obscene, right? Like just and like I remember being like that video on the building in Fallujah where they were like, oh man, this is like a turkey shoot, and it's like, oh my, like the hidden history of the wars and of what happened during 9/11 and after 9/11, the whole airlift of evil that Noor bin Laden talks about. By the way, Noor bin Laden wrote the foreword in Eggs Benedict Option. Yesterday on Content Minded, I had Rag Nationalist. Go to my channel after this episode. Please go Patreon for the full episode. Rag Nationalist on Content Minded, episode 18. But anyways, that's enough shilling. But no, the airlift of evil, right?
Well, yeah, I mean that. Not to mention, you had the immediate speech afterwards.
Yeah.
You had immediately next, right, the Axis of Evil that came out there, which to this day, David Frum and co. have never faced any consequences for what they've done and helped getting the war started and things like that. And I mean,
don't make me Fed post on
well, I mean, well, and that's sort of the long sort of form now of what's happened 21 years since is that that weird anonymous poster was right. Is just that all of this has come home to roost, and 20 years of learning what to do abroad is a great way to start to reharness those tools at home to meet with political dissent. You're either with us or you're with the terrorists, the new axis of evil being, Iran, North Korea, and Iraq at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just definitely an intense sort of looking back and realizing, the cavalcade of everything. This is just like until something else happens, you're in for, this is sort of the long-standing political doctrine that we're going to be under is there's going to be, decades from now, whenever the next big event happens geopolitically, that's going to be, well, is it going to be another Afghanistan? Is it going to be another Iraq? Is this going to be another project for a new American century? Is this going to be part of Project Blank Slate or whatever? All these other white papers and documents about this thing. Like that's the funny thing that I've talked about in the past is with the American government. These guys publish fucking everything. It's
Yeah.
when you should stop being concerned is when they start redacting things or they stop publishing data altogether. That's when you know something fucky's happening.
Yeah. Well, even the way the host populations were, I mean host not as in greeting, I mean host as in a parasite invading them, invading the. Not to say that the American government's a parasite, but maybe. No, the way that the sort of like containment that the policy of the quote unquote police action towards Afghanistan and Iraq. I mean, the images of the Middle Eastern conflict were very like I think unique at the time, where half of it was sort of like a police state that they were inflicting on these people. The other half was, even in terms of active combat, it very much was kind of treated like a colony, kind of like, I guess, will be a comparison, the way that the sort of British conducted military actions in India, for instance. They, in name only, in all but name, they sort of were like a colonized people, the Iraqis and the Afghanis. And I feel like the sort of the aesthetic of, like even in Gulf War One in the early '90s, you could say that just like seeing like the oil fields blown up and like how they would have like little villages next to the oil fields that were completely obliterated, and sort of in Iraq and Afghanistan, you still had the sort of like the refusal of the American government to admit that it basically was like a colony, and it sort of was an imperial action. And I just remember seeing footage from the time of combat and of like, it was so surreal at the time. It was surreal in a way. And I can't even put it into words, I feel. But before we get to that, memories of the 9/11, the day of. So I don't know if you could remember. Maybe you
Well,
should go first.
I do because it's a flashbulb memory and I'll never forget it.
Yeah.
School that morning, then all of a sudden, you get called home. My grandfather had picked me up and I had noticed that something was obscenely strange for two reasons. Like one, the 2 or 3 days before the last week previously, some kids had like tried to start a fire. Like they had gotten a big brush fire going where the
Hmm.
playground is. And there was some woods. I always thought that was always. I always associate that with some sort of omen. But
Whoa.
then I notice, it's not just my grandfather picking me up because at the time my brother was just born a month earlier, extremely premature.
Oh, you have a
Uh,
brother?
yeah, I do. I have family.
Oh
I'm
man,
not just
I
some
know that.
random person that exists. Yeah, no, I got two younger ones. I'm the oldest,
Oh,
and he had just been born, and like the month prior, very premature. Things were very rough, but like, my grandfather picked me up, but I noticed like the entire parking lot was filled to the brim. There were looked like hundreds. It was probably not hundreds, but what looked like hundreds of parents yelling at the registrar and yelling at the front desk, trying to get their
hmm.
children out, only to sort of drive home. And, my mother's on the television, or watching the television in the living room, and we get to our little house and, there's the news, these two towers. I think by the time I had gotten home, one of them had fallen. And then, but she had the news squarely focused on the Pentagon because that's where
Yeah.
my dad worked. And, we haven't heard from him for a good chunk of the day. And I mean, thankfully we got a phone call, it got out okay. But I mean, it was not like today. I mean, even if something like that were to happen today, phone lines would for sure be busy.
Yeah.
This would definitely be down. Let's not kid ourselves. But it was definitely just a very surreal moment. And I mean, that really did shape a lot of my worldview for like the rest of my time growing up. It's because like, well, your dad has a job to do, and you better start by, you're a kid. You kind of have to buy into it. It was like in first grade at the time, and yeah, I mean, I went to more MWR concerts than I'd like to imagine. I've seen Toby Keith in concert more times than I'd like to admit.
Man.
So I mean, like that, and like that's when country music really had its gaslighting memory. Don't forget. Have you forgotten all that sort of stuff? It definitely it's just, yeah. It's weird that I'm talking like this because I'm typically more put together, but it's
You were
just
only
that
like how old at this
it's
time?
like 6,
Oh man, yeah.
something like that. Definitely something for sure to watch. Sort of the world, virtually disappear and to not know whether or not family was going to make it or not. And then of course the war happened, and it's he was there in 2003, came back for the surge, retired here in the US obviously. But yeah, like that entire conflict is more or less my growing up years, and trying to make sense of it. And even now is coming into my late 20s, I definitely am still trying to reconcile with it.
Maybe we'll never, I think that you could come up with any sort of geopolitical, sort of witch doctoring as to retroactively not justify, but to retroactively explain Iraq and Afghanistan. But I feel like all those explanations sort of fall short. I mean, yes, it was true that even in the early 90s, you had people like Zbigniew Brzezinski talking about in the Grand Chessboard how you have to control Afghanistan because, you have to either use the Northern Alliance or American troops to prevent the Chi-Coms building a pipeline, blah, blah, blah. But really, it seems like out of all the wars in human history, it really is kind of why do we go there? I mean, even Vietnam, you could say nah, Vietnam wasn't justified, but to say the containment policy thing about the Soviet Union, whatever.
Well,
right?
Vietnam has its own complicated history because Vietnam also
With
had
the French,
the French Indochina and sort
Yeah.
of the American pressure on that. Not to mention that even we had even sent advisors and intel people back when fucking Eisenhower was in office. We think of this being a 60s and early 70s conflict. No, we've been involved in that area for almost 30 years.
The first people to know about Dien Bien Phu was America. So,
and to a big part of also trying to cut down on French colonial claims because that was a big part and parcel of American foreign policy at the time was to.
There are rumors that the Americans actually gave the Viet Minh intelligence before.
I wouldn't be surprised.
But,
but I have to do some research on that. But I mean. Not to mention that's already been a region of the world that America had been predominantly involved with for the last 20 years at that time, not just to mention with dealing with the Soviets in Afghanistan, but America's growing relationship, of course, also during the its growing relationship with the Saudis under George H.W. Bush, which had also been seen as
even before with the oil.
Even beforehand with the oil agreements between the Brits which transferred over to the Americans, which also was, it also has its issues in, the formulation of OPEC and everything like that. But I mean, America and also sort of Anglo-America has this long history in the region that America has sort of become the inheritor or progeny of the great Anglo projects in the Middle East. Now it's just so fundamentally different because it's not for, as Bat points out, this isn't like an empire where the empire is meant to be the benefit of its citizens, but instead this is to the bereft of its citizens. It's to enrich everyone else.
Exactly. Well, even the post-colonial wars for independence. I mean, there was funny business going even in Indonesia with Suharto and his tacit support from the American government. In Africa, there was a lot of funny business, even as Bat points out again, the American, the CIA supporting legit communists like Nyeri, it's the decolonization of the Europeans. I feel even nowadays, even plays into politics nowadays with what's happening in the blue yellow country and their approach to Russia. That was the fact that the Americans were tag teaming in some instances with the Russians to kick out the older colonial powers in certain parts of the world. I mean, the Middle East, but really the Middle East, I feel, you could say Iran, Iraq was a big shelling point where America supported Iraq, against Iran. There was even in popular media, if I recall, up until even the 1990s, showing how anti-Americanism had really engulfed the Middle East. A lot of it was because of the support of that, who, right? And Middle East. There was even in the Simpsons episode, I remember, alluded to how in Iran they sort of hated America and they had effigies of the president. And Iran Contra, that was another thing too. That was, again, everywhere you go, it's that one nation in the Middle East that seems to have their fingerprints all over every American action in the Middle East.
almost as if someone named Mearsheimer and Walt wrote a whole book about it in 2008 about a certain lobby.
Yeah, but he can do it though because he's one. If his last name was John Smith instead of Mearsheimer, he could never have written that book.
Well, that he's just from the University of Chicago, where all of our great deep state apparatchiks come from, including a certain well-coiffed gentleman.
It is funny though, being both of us going through Ron Paul libertarianism. I mean, a lot of that was basically crafted by libertarianism. Was like a project of the University of Chicago economics department. So when you really think about it, that's a huge black pill for any, teetering on the edge libertarians out there. But no, so
who pointed that out the other day on Twitter? That like a good chunk of like today's new right or whatever came from sort of that like Ron Paul hoppy BAP. Okay, where he pointed out that like so many of like today's like American right wingers do come from that like Ron Paul libertarian Hans Hermann Hoppe pipeline, and a lot of it's getting squandered.
Yeah, even the hairdo was a libertarian. He was a libertarian activist.
Yeah,
yeah. Even like when he interviewed Jonathan Bowden, he was still like identifying as a libertarian. For those who don't know, we're talking about Spencer, but yeah. But the hairdo, I love that. That comes from Sopranos. My memory of 9/11 is it was sort of weird how in school we did get off, but I think I told this. I was the only person in my school to actually, the only student to actually watch 9/11 apart from another person. Because that morning I was taking the attendance sheet down to the library, and the library, there was like the computer banks on the one side, computer lab, and the other side was this other room that had the only TV that had cable. And the door was open because there was like the librarian desk, and I handed my attendance sheet, but me and this other student were sort of like piddling around there, and it was the librarian and a few other teachers that were looking at the footage. And right when I was there was when the second tower hit. So I was one of the only people in my school to watch it. And then we got home that day early. They let us out early. And my mother was with my grandmother in Niagara Falls. So I think I walked home. And my father actually was on a job, and he was preparing to pour another driveway. And the homeowner that he knew, he's like, guys, come inside, look what's happening. And they're like, yeah, because my mother called my father, and she's like, oh my God, they launched a plane into the Twin Towers, right? He's like, no way, right? He thinks it's a joke. But then he sees it on TV in his customer's house, and it's like, it was sort of one of those moments where even like in Canada, like it's sort of like time stopped. Like you could feel it that morning. That time just like disintegrated in a way. And in fact, especially because New York is so close to us, right? Niagara. So it was very, the whole week and the whole month. And I think up until Christmas, it's like really the only time I felt the same way was January in 2020, that first few months of the Chinese delicacy. I think you could say COVID now on YouTube, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. The first month of sort of like the indeterminacy of things where you could feel that history could go any other way, right?
Yeah.
That was what I felt after 9/11. I was too young to articulate it, but I think now the fact that I felt it again in the first few months of the Chinese delicacy,
do you remember? Okay, no, that's a very good point. I don't mean to cut you off, but
no, I'm done.
You just triggered something in my brain that just hit me off. I was like, no, that makes a lot of sense because, I mean, yes, immediately what came afterwards was in October, and you started things off with Afghanistan, but there was that period of fear and uncertainty where, like, that's the difference between sort of like September 11th and COVID. Was like September 11th, like you kind of already knew where the narrative was going instantly by the end of the day. The media and the White House already knew where it was going to go, where it was happening, which kind of already makes you a little more questionable of things.
I was going to say, like, the fact that they had pre-established targets in Iraq to destroy their infrastructure, they had those the stealth bombers. It's like, That's kind of weird.
Well, that and
Yeah.
come 2003, right? They also had the live bombing of Baghdad with airstrikes and things on national television. But
Yeah.
you
I
know,
remember those. I
yeah, but
remember
everything.
and it's
Yep.
like the tracers, the green tracers. Remember, you see it go up. Oh man, yeah, I remember that.
But everything at that time had a sort of a media set aside,
Yeah,
a media narrative and a push narrative to go for. Whereas those early days of, sort of like February, March, April of 2020, you didn't really know where things were going. There was a certain perspective of fear. And I mean, I don't think anyone really knew. I mean, there are some people, I'm sure, that if we were to look back, probably called it 100%.
Oh yeah.
But
Oh yeah.
I think about the fact that like there's like a month and a half where no one really knew what was going on. The media hadn't yet set a narrative yet. And I mean, it was very anti-China, like anti-CCP, anti-Xi Jinping. Well, like, how dare they not tell the press? How dare they not, like, give us the full truth to the media? Like, people are dying. And then immediately, like, sometime in, like, late March, turning into April, just, like, snap, it went into Trump sucks, and we're going to orient this around the election.
Oh, by the way, it's racism that is the real pandemic.
Oh, that's true. Remember to go into Chinatown and hug a Chinese person, as Nancy Pelosi told us. But yeah, that's what
that was so stupid. My God, that's.
But I mean, that was the other thing too that even George W. Bush had to play damage control for, was the vibrant otherization of anyone who looked like they could be from those two countries.
Yeah, they even burned down Hindu mosques. I mean, not mosques, Hindu temples that they thought.
Yeah, I mean, Sikhs got attacked like on the streets of New York for not even being Muslim or Arab or anything. They just got whacked for just wearing their
Which
own
is funny though.
gear.
Yeah, it's funny because in Canada we had the same way before America. We had Middle Eastern and East Indian culture war issues. We had the thing where the Mounties, the guy wanted to wear the turban, and which I mean to tell you the truth, I don't have any problem with that, because if they're like the way I look at it is, if the Sikhs were good enough to wear turbans in World War II, fighting alongside British troops, then who cares, right? But also in the schools, the kid with the kirpan that he had to sew into his belt, right?
Yeah.
Although nowadays in certain American schools, I mean, I'd encourage Sikh kids to wear kirpans. We've all seen the footage, right? Anyways, that's another current issue. Don't worry about it. American schools, a certain demographic of kids. No, I think that America, the fact that you were right, like the whole sort of artifice of the but then of course you did have the nascent like woke narrative of like, well, it's really about the retaliation towards Muslims, which I mean, I do agree. I think like the more in hindsight, the more we see that the history of Iraq and Afghanistan coming out of 9/11, like so much of the sort of like very cheap, very like plastic flag form of American jingoist patriotism, which I mean, as a military brat, you should you obviously experience firsthand, right? Like,
well, yeah,
going to Toby Keith concerts, right?
More than I'd like to admit. But like that and yellow ribbons and the things like that, it was very much a different type of. I can't compare it to anything else because that's what I've just experienced for the last 20 years of my life. Like, I can't compare it to any other war. I don't know what it was like. Yeah. But I mean, yellow ribbons everywhere, just the and I mean, that was the other thing too, is that, like I said earlier, like, you have to view this with some lens or forethought about Vietnam, because I mean, Vietnam took such a public relations image hit to the United States military, and how the American culture at the time, or those coming back, got treated like such shit, that it really did inspire a lot of changes to how we do veterans care and change our way of perceiving veterans. I mean, like the way that Vietnam handled those who came back, it really is a tragedy, considering that a lot of those guys, either got drafted or, to the few that did, I mean, to those that did volunteer, right? Like, you come back after a war that had become so universally unpopular and you're just treated like other shit. Like to an extent, like, yeah, like the hippies had a very valid claim, at least those that, protested that did fight.
Yeah.
And then like clearly, like, I mean, of course the American military got rehabilitated through films like, Top Gun, The Final Countdown, all this sort of stuff to like change the imagery abroad. But, it's also a form of like diversionary foreign policy, right? You get these like quick little victories like Grenada or Panama or whatever.
Yeah.
And
I wrote about that in my did you read my my memoriam for Colin Powell? Did you read that?
Yeah, I did. I really liked that article.
Yeah. PCB, like vaporwave military action. So America, go on.
No. So like, I mean, that the rehabilitation of it. So even, and I mean, you saw that a lot in the media and culture, both like very publicly, but also even in sort of like smaller films. Like there's a really good example of this called, like, I think it's called Taking Chance, where it's just about this guy taking a fallen Marine back to his hometown and his casket and everything like that. Yeah. And I mean, like, these are very powerful films. And they're very much tearjerkers. Like, they'll do it for you because, I mean, like, that shit is like incredibly sad that this has happened. And it's even more
Vietnam veteran films.
Well, yeah, very different from Vietnam veterans. But to where now I think that really was so it's so totally opposite of Vietnam, to where like you can go to any major national park in America, like Yellowstone, in places where they have tours, or they do this especially at Mount Rushmore with the presidents, where they'll do whole things for sort of the opposite of humiliation rituals, but they are ritualistic in the way that they'll ask people who have served to stand up and give them their attention. My father hates "thank you for your service." I think a lot of vets do. Like,
oh yeah, really?
Job. Yeah, my dad doesn't like it at all.
But he likes getting. Does he get the free meals and everything?
Oh, I mean, he certainly doesn't mind when he can get a discount at Texas Roadhouse or whatever. But I mean, he's not a fan of that phrase.
Thank you for your service. Yeah, that is kind of like, especially if you have doubts about why you were doing it to begin with and why you were there. Like,
well, it's funny because he didn't expect to be in for so long. He's he definitely was like, well, I got in here to learn how to fix radios. I didn't expect this to turn into like a 30-year career.
Did he give radios the Brogan adjustment?
The what?
Again, another Sopranos reference where the DVD player wasn't working.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
I need
Paulie's
to
in the yeah. Paulie's in the. He's like, I was in the Army Service Corps. He's like, yeah, you know how to fix these things. We got to give it a Brogan adjustment. He starts hitting it.
Percussive maintenance, as the Navy likes to call it.
Percussive mate. Oh, yeah. I love how the Army, the grunts, they develop all sorts of colorful metaphors.
Yeah. And it's just like, and that's the other thing too, is just like you have a totally revamped nature of the culture. And I'm sure that there were agreements that were already made during the Bush administration, but I really remember the big libertarian anti-war talking point. And this is where people like Caitlin Johnstone still have some sway with a lot of libertarian, even though like she's a diehard, dyed-in-the-wool socialist. Like she's probably the last existing one out there that you could probably point to and be like, oh yeah, right, you used to exist. You're like the last of your species. But
she does have terrible takes from time to time.
Oh, of course. Oh, no one will ever doubt that. I mean,
but I mean, from our perspective, what
the word I would say for sure is that she's been very solid on the anti-war position.
Yeah.
Which is why people like Radlib like her so much. I mean, her analysis anti-war stuff is actually pretty good, but the rest of her takes are just garbage. But the point I was getting at though is that, I noticed it come like the Obama administration, I'm like, oh, why is there a clause in the National Defense Authorization Acts that encouraged continued public relations between the United States and the United States military with Hollywood, in order to make sure that all films are reviewed by them, usually for propagandistic purposes.
Even Black Hawk Down was a propaganda film.
Yeah.
I mean, even though it was an aesthetic film, but yeah.
I mean, it's definitely a film worth watching. But I mean, yeah, it's the thing that I just, it's like, oh, that's the other thing too. Like after 9/11, you had, the Sum of All Fears, because there was that unconcerned fear, all those documentaries about being like, well, the real next big threat to American security is dirty bombs, or all these other
Colin
kind of
Powell holding up the anthrax.
yeah, or that,
or the UN. Sorry, was it the UN or was it?
It was the United Nations.
Yeah.
That, or like Zero Dark 30, like all these films from even the last couple. I mean, even Top Gun, the sequel, to me is just like, oh, this is a straight up milprop film. But I mean,
it's sort of like all of the politics in the 1990s that were geared towards Eastern Europe and Africa that were sort of erased. I mean, right when, because like you got to think of like, why Serbia really loves Russia? You know why? Because of what happened in Belgrade, because America bombed and killed 3,000, 4,000 people. Like that's, so the history of like the sort of like closing the Clinton years, 9/11, I think, was a sort of great erasure of a lot of like the politics that came previously, in a way. I think like 9/11 was sort of like a time of forgetting in a way. And that now we have, between the wars and the financial calamity in 2008, I mean, really the millennial generation sort of comes into our own in a time where on a metaphysical level, we felt that there was something wrong. But in terms of the way the war was fought, unless you did come from a military family, a lot of what happened in terms of the American public, right? Like, it's almost like it was surreal in that you didn't feel like there was a war for the past, like, I would say 10 years or so, like the last 10 years of it. Like the fact that, I mean, yes, 9/11, the sort of years following it, there was this huge sort of upsurge of like, I think it was Namer Vision that said this. It was the last time in America where you could say that people were more or less like united for that like little brief moment of like, yeah, America, fuck yeah, like we have to go and like get the terrorists, right? But in terms of like the sort of disintegration of American society, it was almost as if these external pressures were going on under our noses, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And you didn't really truly feel it till 2008. I feel like the sort of, you couldn't hide the rot anymore. But even 2008 with the like sort of new monetary policy, there was like, like, oh, well, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. We got it under control. Kind of like the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. Don't worry about it. Now the sort of technocrats, the sort of managerial state can come along and be like, no, American public, don't worry about it. We have this covered. It's like, go back to like, consuming, I don't know, go back to watching the No Spin Zone with Bill O'Reilly or whatever. Like I think like by the time I would say 2007, 2008 rolled around, would you say that the public consciousness towards the two wars was sort of like evaporating?
Oh, I mean, it had taken a pretty substantial change, not to mention by 2008 also like the domestic had really taken over as well. I mean, this is at a time where, the focus was, a lot of the focus was so much, and I'm sure there are plenty of people that will rake me over the coals in the comments, but like 2008 was at a point where like the domestic really did take over again from the attention overseas. I mean, this was at a time now where you had the response to Hurricane Katrina, which had, famously,
I forgot. Yes.
Kanye West's famous bit about George Bush doesn't care about black people. And to where he
actually
now,
he cared about black people too much. That was the big problem. No, sorry.
That was
that let the kayfabe slip.
But I mean, also the financial collapse had also just like completely had taken over to where I mean, that we still have not recovered from that, and home ownership had disappeared. And a lot of that, of course, is due to a lot of the policies that were put in place by the Clinton administration. We're going to purposefully give individuals that socioeconomically speaking cannot afford to have mortgages, and we're going to put them in a position to get taken advantage of by a predatory economy, which, here we are, right? Like sort of the story speaks for itself. But I mean, the other thing too, though, that came with the Obama administration was this was the progressive facelift to the war. NFL, I'll read a little bit from last year's piece, but
humanitarian. It was now about women getting education.
No, that's exactly what I've got written here. But for all this pontificating on politics, power, and laws, I should bring us back to the question: what is America on September 11th, 2021? Our culture isn't the same. The rallying around the Stars and Stripes has all but gone across the country to where the national flag is a partisan symbol. A culture that went in with Toby Keith singing "Because we'll put a boot in your ass. It's the American way." To we must think about our obligations to the women and the LGBTQIA X plus XYZ in Afghanistan. That's why we cannot leave. A war that started in a time where both mainstream parties, the United States, publicly opposed gay marriage, and that school choice was considered the biggest civil rights issue of our time by the right, to where now schools have become pledged of blatantly anti-white curriculums, and the right wing is considered transphobic for being against hormone blockers for transgender children. America's culture has drastically shifted to the left and allowing for the regime's geopolitical interests to uniquely coincide with their own goals domestically.
What's happening now? I
know.
Russia's pretty transphobic. I mean, that's probably,
Well, and that's where I think that you also see the last bastions of any sort of traditional order sort of get its target by the media. Like, even when you had that like Bundy Ranch thing a few years ago back, right? And we've talked about this, about like all the terms for it, Al-Qaeda, jihadist, all that sort of stuff. I mean, those are great fucking terms.
I know. We gotta bring back like boomer, like Obama or like Bush era, like boomer humor. My favorites were like Obama, Obongo, One Big Ass Mistake, Abomination, get it?
I have a mug. I think I don't know where I got it from, but I have a mug of like a picture of George W. Bush smiling on it, and it says, "Do you miss me yet?" I remember those getting sold quite popularly during the first term.
Yeah. I wrote about in my article that's hopefully will come out someday soon about how like the Tea Party like was the first, like they were mobilized on YouTube. How like, do you remember this one video? It was this guy dressed up like Thomas Paine, and the video was called The Second American Revolution, where he had like a cup of wine that he poured water into. He's like, "This is the cup of liberty being watered down." It's like, do you remember that one? Like all those videos of the Tea Party and like, I think like the sort of, in some ways, like modern culture where nothing is, well, I mean, things are unique to us. Certain issues are unique to us, but I feel like a lot of this stuff was tested. Like even like the sort of, if you're watching Bill O'Reilly, like the whole, the freedom fries, no spin zone, like the 9/11 mosque, that kid Jeremy Glick, where his father died in 9/11. He's like, "I don't think we should go to Iraq," and he's like, "What are you talking about? You're disrespecting your father's legacy." Like that was huge back in the day. That was like of course the narrative was much more centralized to like the media. The social media had not been like what it was now. Like, I mean, you did have forum culture, but that still was very much the periphery of like Western life, as opposed to now where social media is like at the absolute forefront of everything. Like, I mean,
that was also with how Obama got elected. He was really the first to sort of mobilize MySpace, Facebook, Twitter for the purpose of the election. I mean, and that was the other thing too. That's why you got that famous, what's his name? GOP strategist that had a meltdown 2012 election. Oh, Karl Rove. Karl Rove having a fucking meltdown on Fox News about 2012 because all these polling data is wrong. We're supposed to win Ohio, and it's like you guys are skewing your polling data. You're doing phone calls. Everyone's on their phones now. Definitely something to keep in mind. And that's the other thing about culture too, right? When did we joke about this? We were talking about just how like we went from, this like Crusader style-esque rhetoric from George W. Bush to electing a guy with the middle name Hussein into the.
Oh, that was last stream. Yeah, that was last stream. Yeah.
An absolutely crazy time.
I know. It's funny. I had that tweet about Bill O'Reilly, like, the one where it's like, "Anon, wake up." It's so and so. You know that one?
Yeah.
Meme? Or it's like, "Anna, wake up. It's 2009. We're building a mosque." What are you talking about? Mpreg? COVID? They hate Orange Man bad? What are you talking about? We gotta defend, We got to defend freedom fries. You're building a wall. It's got an 11. It's a no spin zone. It's like Bill O'Reilly pointing at you. Like, I love that tweet, by the way. I got to resurrect that one. But yeah, it's like, I love that sort of like the forgotten time memes where it's like wake up, Anon, you know, the Y2K was real. Like, some people say Y2K was real. We just don't realize it yet. Maybe that's true.
Who knows?
But no, it is. Yeah, it is kind of funny, like how things have changed so dramatically. I don't want to say that 9/11 caused the Trump presidency, but who knows right at this point.
Well, it's funny because I mean,
yeah.
he ran on that the Reform Party thing back in 2000. Him and what's his name, Roger Stone, more or less tanked Pat Buchanan. Like they stabbed him in the back, calling him like a Nazi and a racist and all that sort of jazz.
Yeah.
But it was really funny because like 2016, like right after the election, they had Pat Buchanan on for an interview in NPR. And he's just like, well, this dude like stabbed you in the back. And he's like, yeah, but I have to support him because like he's the only one that is remotely repeating anything that I've been warning you about for like the last 50 years.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think, yeah, it's funny. But that shows that Pat Buchanan is a man of supreme principle, though. Like that's the thing. Like he, you know, but I think let's talk about, I think the cultural, yes, I agree. Sparta, 9/11, Y2K was real. Just that it wasn't the internet collapsed. It's just that
it birthed something far worse.
Something far worse, exactly. A force from the future transmutated into the present, building itself in the past. Sorry, I'm doing the meltdown thing, but that's Y2K was real. It just kicked off the meltdown reality we're living in right now.
Oh, well, speaking of meltdown, did you see the executive?
Oh yeah,
he's alive. No, did you see that executive order the other day? Executive order on advancing biotechnology and biomanufacturing innovation for a sustainable, safe, and secure American economy. Oh my! We'll just read a little bit of this.
Let's go. Yeah.
Here, let me find a section for us to read because it's just pure dystopic policy. So here we go. Biotechnology harnesses the power of biology to create new services and products which provide opportunities to grow the United States economy and workforce and improve the quality of our lives and the environment. The economic activity derived from biotechnology and biomanufacturing is referred to as the bioeconomy. The COVID pandemic had demonstrated the vital role of biotechnology and biomanufacturing in developing and producing life-saving diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines to protect Americans in the world. Although the power of these technologies is most vivid at the moment in the context of human health, biotechnology and biomanufacturing can also be used to achieve our climate and energy goals, improve food and security and sustainability and secure chains across America. To our later in the executive order, it says we need to develop genetic engineering technologies and techniques to be able to write circuitry for cells which predictively program biology in the same way in which we write software and program computers. So what was that bit from Nick Land's meltdown about, like, you know, your Xeno data getting hacked or whatever?
Yeah.
We're just living in Nick Land's meltdown.
Exactly.
We're just living in it.
You know what's funny though is that if people
human animal chimeras, Alex Jones, right?
Human animal chimeras. I saw him in a lab in white papers. Apparently he said that he knew someone that was in a bio lab where they were developing that, you know, like the Dolly the lamb. Apparently they actually did achieve animal human chimeras, but or that could have been he was on a bender, but who knows?
Who tweeted that? Was that Upstate Federalist or someone?
Yes.
Or is this like, you remember when, you know, when you were a kid and Dolly was in the news about cloning animals and then no one talked about it anymore for ethics reasons?
Yeah. There was an in academia at the time, there was a number of literature, if you look back around like 2004 to 2007, where they a lot of like critical animal theory people, a lot of like bioethics papers are written about this. But it's funny though, because what was I saying? Yeah, like if you look at my I have videos of this on my YouTube channel where I talk about the Wired magazine from the early 90s to the early 2000s, the back cover illustrations called Artifacts from the Future, where they talk about this specifically, that you will like take a drug or like some consumer product that will gene hack you.
Yeah.
And it's funny because a lot of them are humorous because it's technological consumerism for problems of modern life, like the pollution levels being ridiculous, and life on Mars having like unique horrors. It's like a lot. Like, yeah. So go to my YouTube channel. I cover all of them, and also I have this. I've yet to release. I think I should release it soon. Where I found this institute. It's called the Institute for the Future, where they talk a lot about this. Where if you ever read the Sir H.P. Lovecraft novel or a short story, what's it called? Key Performance Indicators. It's kind of like that. Yeah, it's like that, where it's like, you train yourself through biohacking to become like this perfectly efficiency maxed citizen. Like I talk a lot of this in my Patreon, my General Reviews series about Psychopolitics by Byung-Chul Han. Like he goes into like big dataism and stuff like that. I'm almost finished the book. I think this weekend I'm going to release the final chapter. And so it's a lot of this stuff that you see where it was planned like literally decades before. There were people speculating about this, like from science fiction writers to like actual government policy people talking about this. And now that they have a bill about it, like, was this signed into law? What is this?
No, this is an executive order signed on the 12th.
Oh my God.
But no, there's I have this book. It's by John R. Evans, The History of History and Future of Bioethics, and they have a whole section in there about cloning that I'm now going to have to go find my copy of and go reread it again, because it's just like, man, oh man. I can't wait for them to repo my vital organs when things go wrong. But again, it's like with certain documents about foreign policy, for the new American century and all that jazz. Just a lot of it feels very relevant to how things written decades ago leads to certain events culminating to where we are now.
Yeah. So I think we should talk about well, I guess we covered a little bit of the cultural importance of 9/11, but also the millennials being like, this is our kind of like JFK or Vietnam. Like, this is like, where were you when this happened? You alluded to this in the beginning of the stream, and I was reading this article in the American Mind about, I believe it was published, on the 6th of this month, about the Great Forgetting. And let me look this up. I actually have it. This is by Alexander Riley, professor of sociology at Bucknell University. This is Alexander Hamilton Institute, the study of Western civilization. So why it get published in the American Mind? It's very well. Apparently, he publishes frequently in the American Mind about Muslim fear and alienation after 9/11. By contrast, the commemoration of example of the heroic deeds of passengers of Flight 93 was overwhelmed the terrorists and hijackers. They'll inevitably be spun to the direct consonant with woke politics. For example, Mark Bingham, one of the passengers in Flight 93, will appear in a story together with Reverend Michael Judge, who died at the World Trade Center. Beyond the two of them having died in 9/11, while enduring to 8 others. What's the connection? Never miss a pride parade, and were greeted that God made them. Oh, apparently they're gay. So that's the story, that they were gay, right?
Like every modern story.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh God. 9/11 has already reached a space of collective oblivion that it took Pearl Harbor many more decades to reach. That is because the force that ultimately pushed both of these hollow days of our civil religion into the twisted narratives of the American hating woke elite. So again, this very much is like boomer con language. The fracturing of our culture into two irreconcilable sides, and the vast and rapid increase of the cultural reach of those who want all narratives of traditional American heroism and national identity to disappear. We will, in these days, all around September 11th, read a good number of claims of how we will never forget where I was on 9/11. I've spent a good deal of the 21 years since the attack doing work to keep alive the memory of the heroes of that day. I regrettably admit that my faith in the project is extinguished. Most of America has already forgotten. At least half of it remembered the day as a sign of American fallenness and failure. Well, I know you have thoughts about this, but my thoughts are that, well, I kind of disagree, actually. I think that much older version of American, like Bush era patriotic conservatism rightfully deserved to die. And in fact, it really just essentially, it's like, the liberal equivalent of that, the left liberal equivalent. It's like that tweet that went viral, posting the pictures with like Bush and Obama and Bill Clinton together. You know that tweet? Saying like,
Yeah.
this was the America that used to exist before Trump. It's like the boomer conservative equivalent was like, wow, we were all patriotic on 9/11. Don't you miss that America? It's like, no, that America was a lie. It was a lie because it further empowered the regime to destroy any sort of like nascent form of reaction that could exist in America, I feel. And that, like we were saying, like all of that stuff came home. Now you have this revival of like what was in the 1990s, American government actions against the militia movement and these evil white nationalists. And, I think that to sort of like lament this, like, oh my God, people were so much more patriotic on 9/11. It's like, well, look what happened. Did those wars serve American interest? Did they serve American interests of the political right? No, it didn't. Really. So I know where American mind is going by publishing that, but
I vehemently, and I don't,
Go
and
ahead.
again, I'm sure the comments will have some interesting thoughts. I know that we have quite a few vets that listen, but I really do not like the boomer.
Yeah, no disrespect
con.
to the vets, by the way.
Well, of course
to
not.
The vets,
yeah. That's not the intent of this discussion in any way, shape, or form. Those guys went through more hell than anyone else I can imagine in this day and age, and God bless them for it. But no, I really do hate why can't we just come back to the good old, I think even Metal Gear Rising Revengeance made fun of that, like the good old days after 9/11. And it's just, I really do hate that, because it's just like, well, what did that take for that flash in the pan moment of that beloved bipartisanship? And what was very frustrating was just like, it took a national tragedy and like 2 terrorist attacks in DC and in New York City for that to happen. I mean, no one wants that ever to happen again, but it's just like, that's kind of what caused this visceral, we want blood kind of moment to happen, and where people kind of got along. It was that sort of like, and I mean, you can also really do see that as well in what's the word I'm looking for? In Sam Raimi's, like the original, what was it, 2002 Spider-Man? That they had to edit in post, because in the reflections in the posters it had the Twin Towers. In the same way, I think they also had to edit Lilo and Stitch, Disney's film, for the animation as well, because that was also post.
You know what's funny? A lot of bands actually got chick-canned or hammered because their albums were going to be released near 9/11. And my favorite band, Nevermore, they released their album Enemies of Reality, I think the week before 9/11, or a week after. And it was like, oh my God, what are we going to do? So there was a huge suspension of all life in America after 9/11. There was, I would say, similar to the first few months of COVID, but like really, all the planes ground down. And there was that, here in Canada, there was that town in Newfoundland. Was it Newfoundland? Yeah.
I like this take here. I think this is very true.
Any functioning equivalent to 9/11 today would get memed to death upon arrival. Yeah. I mean,
that's how dysfunctional our current society is that something like that could happen today, and someone would easily spin it to own the libs, or Dash Dabrowski being like, big news, everybody, Khan's
big
getting
news.
Khan's getting owned by Stone. Khan's getting owned because some major terrorist attack happened.
Do you think probably a huge portion of us in the political right would end up siding with the Muslims if 9/11 happened today? Like we'd be like, yeah, they're
No.
based.
There,
Maybe.
I
Yeah.
doubt it, and I think that those that do would probably very quickly identify themselves perhaps as
Feds.
well, I was
Oh.
just gonna say non-serious actors, but
Oh
sure,
yeah.
that
Yeah.
too. But like, I do get very, I cock my brow very quickly when someone starts fetishizing individuals that are usually anathema to the society or civilization that you live in. I get it. Everyone wants to own the gay or whatever, but
Yeah.
there are plenty of
Maybe a
times.
lot of my my Russia takes come from that. I hate to say it, but like
And I mean, there's a lot of that sort of time where it's,
yeah.
sort of stuff like that of, I get it,
I
man.
think
Globalism sucks, but keep in mind that at the end of the day, the enemy of your enemy is not your friend.
yeah, I can agree, but at the same time I think like even during 9/11, I think you know what would happen?
I mean, here's another good point too. Like,
Okay. Oh, Cyber Ninja Zero, yeah. I mean, how many schools yeah, that's true.
yeah,
That's true.
that's definitely true.
The fact that we call him Saint Elliot is probably too much.
I think you're the only one I know who does that.
No, 4chan always they says
Okay.
Saint Elliot. Yeah. I do it as a joke. I'm not condoning what he did, obviously. I mean, I think Elliot Rodger, it was a very sad and pathetic thing that he did, obviously. Like the reality of it is that, he had a chance, but he squandered it. I like the Crooner take on, if you go to my interview with Crooner, he has a very amazing take on Elliot Rodger. How Elliot Rodger could have been the hero, but he chose not to. He chose nihilistic destruction instead. But anyways, no, what I was going to say, I think what would happen is that domestically, it wouldn't be that there would be people in the right wing that would side with the Muslims. But I think if 9/11 were to happen today, there were certain people that had pretty hair-raising takes, even for that time, like Pat Robertson, where he said that, like,
Didn't he
gay
do that also
marriage
with
and
Hurricane Katrina being like gay marriage is like the
yeah,
reason
yeah,
why hurricane? Well, I mean, yeah.
yeah.
I mean,
You
there's
would have those takes, but they would become more accepted even among like Tucker Carlson watchers, I feel. If 9/11 were to happen, they'd be like, yep, America kind of deserved it, actually, because of our sin and degeneracy. Like at that time, you had the Pat Robertson take, which was like universally condemned across the board. But then nowadays, a lot of people on the right are like, I wonder if you had a thing or two right. I think like there would be a faction among the political right that wouldn't go along with like the normie, like the neocon, like patriotic, like jingoist
Well,
narrative.
yeah, and I
Yeah,
mean, like, there's a
yeah,
certain difference between like the Pat Roberts or even like the Falwell religious evangelical fundamentalist aspect
yeah,
to it, because I mean, a
yeah.
lot of that did also paint sort of the rhetoric and attitude that George W. Bush had towards the
The
war
Crusader
itself.
speech was the big,
Yeah,
yeah.
the Great Crusade and things like that. I
Did
mean,
Frum write that one? I wonder.
I don't know if Frum
Yeah,
wrote that one. I just know that he did write the new Axis of Evil speech. I'm sure that he did. And what's
yeah,
funny now, and like whatever is the more clearer course of what's to be said about Falwell and Pat Robertson or whatever, and as well as not just those guys, but also more importantly Frum and all of
yeah,
that sort of speech writing, intelligentsia coalition of politics. Is just
yeah.
that what was all of what do we know more so than anything? Is this just like, well, the GWAT, the Global War on Terror, there was that lovely break of domestic terrorist politics from
Yeah.
2001 to more or less Obama. Because I mean,
Mhm.
what did you the Clinton administration? Janet Reno went like hard
Yeah.
on like militia movements and all sorts of stuff.
Is she
And
dead or is she still alive?
I think Janet Reno passed away. If
Oh,
not, then if so, Rip Bozo. But
yeah. Can you hear
um,
me down there?
yeah, well, let's see real quick. Nope. I see it was in the Wikipedia page. Yeah. Oh, no, just, died the day before the election, 2016. 78.
Yes! We got her! Trump got her! Yes!
Oh,
Amazing!
man.
Amazing!
That's
R.I.P. Bozo. There's a good take actually by Mr. Pacholi. 9/11 launched the OG blog sphere into some ways, certainly made Glenn Reynolds / Instapundit huge. What happened to him? Was Glenn Reynolds the anti-war guy?
I
Because
think so.
he,
The
I
name
know
sounds incredibly familiar.
no, it was Raymond, the Raymond, the Hispanic guy. He died recently, unfortunately, of lung cancer. He was
But
the
no, Glenn Reynolds is a professor.
No, I'm talking
Um,
about the other. Yeah,
oh,
sorry,
okay,
the other
okay.
guy. He had I think it was called antiwar.com. Yeah, Glenn Reynolds still blogging strong with Instapundit. Yeah, I haven't heard of Instapundit in years, actually. Are they still good, Instapundit? I wonder.
I have no idea.
Yeah,
That's sort of that stuff about what's the word I'm looking for? You know how like in the unqualified reservations, like the opening letter, the first
yeah.
one is about talking about the god awful site and UI design of
Oh,
townhall.com.
yeah.
It's just like
Yeah.
it's such a boomer-esque
Oh, yeah.
style
Justin
of
Raimondo. That's Justin.
yeah.
R.I.P. Justin
Justin
Raimondo. He died
Raimondo,
of
yeah.
lung cancer a few years
Yeah,
ago. Yeah.
Radlib knew him quite well and quite personally.
Really?
Definitely,
Eh?
yeah, he did.
Wow.
Like if you ever want a history of sort of like the anti-war paleocon libertarian position, like
Yeah.
Radlib's your guy.
Interesting.
He's known a lot of people in that regard.
Yeah,
But
I should talk to him.
yeah, one of these days you should.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Mr.
no,
Mono was a great guy.
his writing has still held up
Yeah.
incredibly well to this day.
It's very unfortunate he died. He was only like 50 something, if I recall. Or
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, dude just confused a BoomerCon with Justin Ramon. Sorry. Yeah, I know. I'm very sorry. Yeah. So there was sort of like, yeah, the burying of, so I think, I forget who said it. I think that oh yeah, Judge Report became very big. Of course, Judge Report was already big because of Bill Clinton.
Oh yeah.
Judge Report, by the way. Oh, I shouldn't say swear words here, but let's just say that they destroyed
they've
themselves.
definitely
Yeah.
they've definitely swung to the left.
Yeah. I mean, there was a time where every morning I was clicking on Judge Report, but I think, I don't know, he just got Trump derangement syndrome all of a sudden, Drudge, or something like
Yeah.
that. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, stupid. But Drudge Report was already big because of Bill Clinton, but of course it became really big at this time. Drudge Report, I think, was like the most traffic site at one time. But they just destroyed all of their BoomerCon audience now. The BoomerCons went elsewhere. Yeah, so the blogosphere was still, I think 9/11 or the subsequent like sort of geopolitical blogging was like very big at this time, especially around the Middle East. The sort of like Middle Eastern industry was created at the time in America, in terms of foreign politics. The think tanks had a rebirth at this time, foreign policy think tanks, it was, but then of course, like you said, like under Obama, it all came home. It all sort of like Americans like just didn't care about foreign policy anymore. And that history, the history of what happened during the wars, you were saying about this sort of human toll. People don't realize the genetic damage that was done to these people in Iraq and Afghanistan. The depleted uranium, the chemical dumps that they of course had intel on, because who are the ones that gave Saddam Hussein the chemical weapons to fight the Iranians? America. So the utter amounts of like human toll lost, the pollution, the children born with birth defects, like all this stuff, like people don't realize a lot of this stuff is still like very much going on to this day in that region of the world. Like what's happening in Iraq right now? Did their government fall recently or something? What happened? There was some kind of
Where in Iraq?
Yeah, in Iraq.
Well, I mean, his name is escaping me, but I mean, there was a well-known cleric that had been there for years now,
Yeah.
and who had announced that he was stepping down. There was a lot of protests about it. The green zone had essentially had to have been evacuated. I mean, just a lot of more or less a government that isn't in works right now. There isn't a coalition or anything governing it, so
Yeah.
definitely not a good place to be in right now.
Yeah. But finally, so the cultural toll, of course, Occupy Wall Street is something that we didn't mention. Because of course, like that's my personal belief is like the whole take that oh, it was actually corrupted by woke politics. Like, no, Occupy Wall Street was, in my opinion, always always an op. In my opinion, it was a glow in the dark op. In my opinion, I think like the fact that it came into cultural life with such veracity all of a sudden, and it wasn't kind of like the Tea Party. Because here's the thing: I was reading articles because of my article I'm writing. The Tea Party was co-opted after by the Republicans, by hideous fundraising super PAC lobbyists, okay, that turned them into like the Tea Party candidates. You gotta give money to the Tea Party, to Michelle Bachmann,
God, what are they doing today? What is she doing today?
I wonder, is Michelle Bachmann? Let's look at her. Let's see, Michelle Bachmann.
Let's go find out. But I mean, yeah,
I mean, look good actually.
I have no, I don't want to know.
Still looks kind of decent nowadays. I mean, she's still. What am I doing, man? What am I doing?
Your thirst has no bounds.
Yeah, I know. Keith Woods had a good video on Occupy Wall Street. Yeah, he did have a good video. No, my opinion.
He's also got a fantastic video on Council of Foreign Relations that you should definitely watch. Yeah.
Who had one?
Keith Woods.
Oh yeah. We need more impersonations, Gio. Yeah, it's true. Michelle Bachmann. I mean, Robert Barnes talked about it, made a deal to see Drudge and not tell anyone. I gotta watch it. I'm a fan of Robert Barnes. I think he's doing good work. But I didn't know that. Drudge Matt Drudge sold the Drudge Report. To Z-word cons. Z-word con chills, of course. No, Keith Woods. Michelle Malkin. Was Michelle Malkin a Tea Party? Oh my God.
Probably. That's not.
I didn't know that.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Makes you wonder her affiliation with a certain Zoomer group, actually. Makes you wonder there. No, so anyways, yeah, so the history was the Tea Party was co-opted by the Republicans. The Tea Party candidate thing where the people had to give money to them. The super PACs came in. There was this, by the way, there was this huge super PAC fund that was given money by the boomers to that disappeared in the Republican coffers. Nobody talked. It was millions upon millions of dollars. Nobody talks about that, okay? Nobody talks about how the Republicans stole money blind from the Tea Party. Okay. Occupy Wall Street, in my opinion, was always an op. So I don't know, what's your sorry, I'm cutting you out. What's your take, Brute, on Occupy Wall Street?
On Occupy? I mean, I know people that were there that have definitely done it. I mean, they're all turned into academic leftists that hate my very existence. So I'm just inclined to believe that, there's definitely some higher set of organization going on that easily attracted the dregs of society that could not accomplish anything in the real world in order to be attracted to power and hurting others. The politics of resentment lives alive and well on the left.
There was a lot of guerrilla academia going on as well.
Oh yeah.
David Graeber launched his career because of it, more or less. I mean, I don't want to speak ill of the dead. I do like a lot of David Graeber's work. I think that some of his work is kind of BS, but like, he did a lot of funny business in academia in terms of like putting the boots to his competition. I don't want to speak ill of the dead. R.I.P. David Graeber. But yeah.
Doesn't want to speak ill of the dead. We just said rip bozo to Janet Reno earlier.
I think David Graeber, he probably did some good in society compared to Janet Reno, but which is funny though. It's funny. A lot of people were talking about that with the death of the Queen. I think Charlemagne even talked about that. How they're all like, "Well, yeah, but you were celebrating when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died." Let's see. Symbolic Queen of England that saw the decline of her own empire. American Supreme Court Justice that is a direct bearing on domestic policy. I wonder who affects us more. I don't know. I wonder who did more evil in the world, Ruth Bader Ginsburg or Queen Elizabeth. I wonder. But it's funny. I had to really go ham on the Irish on Twitter. I deleted those tweets, though. But yeah, I mean, God. But okay, so yeah, let's talk about finally. Let's say the Tea Party, Occupy Wall Street. What do you think? Do you think that these issues are sort of lost to the sands of time? Do you think the millennials still bear the weight of what happened in the 2000s, in the 2010s, or do you think that the Trump presidency 2016 and now Joe Biden, Brandon, that sort of erased that legacy? Or do you think that we're still under the weight of it? Like, yeah.
I think we live under the weight of it still. I mean, 2016 and the Trump era definitely changed things because I think it brought back a lot of the domestic paleo-conservative issues that kind of got wiped away from 2001.
Yeah.
But I mean, we also still have to live with the consequences of what came out of our time post September 11th, whether that's Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, Syria. I mean, our entire Middle Eastern boondoggle, which has a myriad of white papers and documents that are more or less still being followed to the letter to this day,
Yeah.
illustrate that, it can be politics 20, 30 years from now. I'm sure we're still going to talk about the Middle East in some form or fashion in direct consequence from our invasion in 03 and 01.
Yeah.
In the same way, I think we do talk about the Sykes-Picot Treaty in a way. Like those interventions have done some irreparable and irrevocable changes to the geopolitical landscape of that region, culturally, demographically, religiously.
Yeah.
I mean, without 9/11 and without the attacks and the subsequent invasions, and of course the expansion of opening up other fronts to put pressures on geopolitical goals in the Middle East, there wouldn't be the migrant crisis that we see now in Europe.
Yeah, that's true.
We wouldn't see a good chunk of parts of Europe being Islamified, like it's like the 600s again. So I mean, I think that we're still going to see this for quite some time. End of story there.
Now, in your educated opinion, this is something I can never understand, maybe because I'm a Canadian, but why did it literally take 20 years? Why were they there for 20 years? What was the point? How did they justify it to the American people? Or was it just the fact that there was a huge cultural amnesia towards the Middle East during the Obama years? Why were we there for 20 years? Even I say we because Canada was also in Iraq, in Afghanistan, not Iraq, but Afghanistan.
Well, I don't have a total encompassing answer. I think there's a really good part of the answer found in the American Affairs Journal. There's this article that's really worth your time reading called Data-Driven Defeat about Afghanistan, especially because we were there.
You should send it to me, actually.
It's very good. I'll send it to you after the show. But he more or less talks about like what sort of a win condition sort of being an issue, constant looking for interests, re-stratifying, redefining terms, and I think that comes to a big part of it. The second part is that once you get involved, the idea to sell victory at home, of course, got really hard. I think that's why you really did see a massive shift to more progressive facelifts come Obama with women's rights and education and things like that.
They did this during the Balkan Wars, by the way. You know that, eh?
Yeah, I know.
They did. Susan Sontag putting on the
very, very classic playbook, actually. But I mean, even Glenn Greenwald's got the receipts that he's tweeted about. It's very good. And I mean, so to go in and to take out the Taliban, then you have to ask the question, then what? It just became a part of life to constantly be in war. So it really did take a lot of domestic collapse, the financial system, I really think, for people to start questioning it. And it became a self-justifying project where, you can always sell a new threat, a new terrorist group, another aspect of the geopolitical game. I remember Nicholas Allo talking about, prior to the pullout, like, what else did Afghanistan serve as a major project for the West? Well, it served as a giant geographic bulwark to the Belt and Road Project in the Middle East for China. Not to mention the U.S. Geological Survey from 2010 that illustrated that there were untold trillions of dollars of mineral wealth underneath Afghanistan. And
now China has access to.
And now, of course, China has access. And I mean, Obama wanted to leave, and Obama did manage to get his exit somewhat in 2011, although the power vacuum does play a role in the creation of the Islamic State. And at the same time, right, Trump.
Then in Syria, that's
that too. And I mean, but both Trump and Obama did want to leave.
Yeah.
But I think that I think it came with any president that has counter regime goals that you kind of find out that the president doesn't have so much power when it comes to things like wanting to close Gitmo, wanting to end the wars, and realizing that there are multi-billion-dollar industries that are profiting off of this. They don't care how much blood and treasure it takes.
But that's what I mean. Like, even in 2016, or even before that, when, like, again, look what's happening now. It seemed to happen with Syria, where Syria was historically a Russian protectorate, even under the Soviet Union. You know, the sort of Ba'athists, or the equivalent in that area, was always sort of aligned with Moscow. And the fact that they had to basically create ISIS to go after the Syrian government and other governments in that region. And the fact that the Russians, I mean, say what you want about the Russians, right? Even if you are pro blue yellow for whatever reason, you have to realize, like, they're the protectorate of about 2 million Christians in that area that were going to get slaughtered by the creation of the American government, which is really funny because the older narrative was that America is a Christian nation. We were in a crusade. I don't know if it was David Frum or someone other speechwriter that did that, but like, that was the big culture war narrative, was Christian America having its last hurrah with, like, you know, the Bill O'Reilly, the Bush era, which, I mean, we all know Bush let in a lot of cultural rot that would end up destroying that picture of an older Christian America. But we only didn't realize it till later on, because he would give the Christian conservatives their little, like, you know, here's Terry Schiavo, here's the stem cell thing, like the human cloning, Dolly, shut that down, right? Like, he would give you those little things, right? But what happened what was the thing that still went on during the Bush era, right?
Yeah.
The big one that recently got, you know, axed, right, by the Supreme Court. No, so there was all these symbolic things, and Bush still had to keep them happy, and he had the Crusader thing, but we all really know that it wasn't about that. It was about the last gasp of resistance to the global liberal regime. The you know, Samuel P. Huntington thing, right? Like, although I would say that the criticism from the political right of Huntington, which is more recent, I was hearing some chatter among BAP people about this, which is that Huntington focused on religion for a very specific reason, because he didn't want to focus on race. But that's neither here nor there, right? That's, you know, but I think that nowadays, the way that we see warfare, like you were saying, with humanitarian turn, if you want to call it that, which is really such an abhorrent lie. I can't even begin to tell you how disgusting that is, to say that while we're bombing people for, you know, humanitarian reasons. Like, I just feel that if you look at nowadays, the way that the infrastructure is different in terms of what happened in the 2000s till now, in terms of the deindustrialization of the American military, I can't even see the economic benefits in terms of these military contractors to stay there for 20 years. I mean, was it just that the American government, they couldn't justify leaving after a while? It was sort of like too big to fail. Was it that? Or, you know what I mean?
Those are things that I still think about, that I don't have a complete answer to. And I feel like if I were to find an answer, it would take me like 10 years.
But that's what I mean, because in terms of economics, like, you could say that, yes, the military contractors like Raytheon and how,
well, I mean, that's where you did get a lot, though. Like, you know, like that whole line about military spending, like, oh, we spend more than all these other countries combined, and I'm like, those are all,
what does it get you?
But those are all wartime stats.
Yeah,
those are all wartime stats. Is what I'm saying.
No, but that's what I mean. If you can't even supply efficiently your proxy warriors in Eastern Europe or in the Middle East, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's not like World War II, where America was peak military industrial complex. It's like the post-industrialization of that military industrial complex did not justify Iraq and Afghanistan for the last 10 years of its existence. Like, I don't.
Well, no, I'm inclined to agree with that, but I would also counter and say I think what we're seeing right now across the globe is a demonstrative level of, I guess, it's terrible to say this, but like, considering that you have an absolute imbecile whose brain is not there at the head of the White House, and you've got a crazy 80-year-old drunkard from San Francisco traveling any way she wants in order to make even more money on the stock market.
Yeah.
And yet somehow the bureaucracy and sort of the managerial state's doing a really, really good job at managing to fight proxy wars in several places at once and keep things going while still selling and shoveling BS to the American people.
Yeah.
I'd say that that's rather impressive, and which is even more depressing. But I mean,
oh no,
we're still gonna live.
You're right. I'm too much of a right-wing third worldist for my own good, man. You're right. I hate to say it.
It's a big issue, I think, for the right in general.
Yeah.
But the other thing too, right, is that we also just saw a great loss of good stock from the World War I and World War II. But
yeah.
I mean, like I had mentioned earlier, I really do think that one of the final things to say though about just September 11th in general is that we are going to live under the long shadow of that event, whether we want to acknowledge it or not, no matter how bad the culture war gets. I mean, there of course are going to be ritualistic remembrances and memorials, as there should be, but there will come a day, I fear, that it will be treated like Americans treat Pearl Harbor Day today. And that's also in part just because the people that are from here were not even here in this country prior to 1965. But I just do think that there'll be a long shadow, both in terms of foreign policy, but a lot of old hawks in the White House and in government and the State Department that will view everything fundamentally like Iraq and Afghanistan, the same way that the baby boomers that got us into those places constantly viewed it in Vietnam.
Yeah. But that's the sad part. A part of me wants to say that, and again, this happened recently with the Queen dying. A lot of the takes of like, oh, who cares? We're like these free individuals, and why do we care about traditions and like, why do we have public displays of mourning or remembrance? It's like I fear that part of the current liberal regime, if you want to call it postmodernism or not, I don't think it's postmodernism. I think hypermodern is a better term, as I always say. I think that a part of it is this sort of like loss of remembrance. It's sort of like this purposeful effacement of our capacity to remember, because our ancestors very much had religious and ritualistic approaches towards great events of significance. And that was integral, I think, to every high civilization, is their capacity to remember who they are and their own greatness and their own past. But nowadays, it seems that even the way that we talk about 9/11 in such cynical terms, which, I mean, let's face it, I mean, in a way, there's a difference between remembering a monarchy and an empire, and remembering something that was a wound inflicted to a populace, and that was cynically exploited or maybe created, who knows, right? Conspiracy.
Yeah.
To exploit various geopolitical interests of a very small class of people that run our lives. I mean, we even have veterans I can see in the chat, like our good friend Joshua Ham. Like, I mean, if you're a veteran, you should be pissed. You should be upset. You should be angry that you were lied to. And, it must be an impossible position to be a veteran of Iraq or Afghanistan and to realize all that's been transpiring for the past 20 years. And to realize that, I mean, us millennials are one thing, but imagine being a Zoomer. And if you see like us having our future stolen from us because of those towers falling, imagine being a Zoomer and not having the recollection, the sort of living memory of 9/11, and being like, wow, I guess my future was destroyed because of what happened after that day. Like, it's just, I don't think we can even contemplate the metaphysical sickness that it was unleashed upon us after that day. There was this one clip I remember seeing of there was someone with a camcorder in Brooklyn, and he pans over to this working class guy, and he says, and he was in sunglasses, the beard. He's like, I think the world's going to change after this day. And he was right. The world changed after that day. And it's like, I think that we can't even begin to comprehend. But then I know maybe we make too much of it because we're millennials and we that was our Vietnam. But it's like, Yeah, it's true. I think that things were eternally different. The trajectory of the world was going on a different path, but that day changed things forever, in my opinion. So I feel like as much as our history, as much as our future was robbed from us as millennials, imagine being a Zoomer, right? Imagine. Like, they didn't have a chance, really. You don't have a chance. As a Zoomer, listening to this, you don't have a chance. And I'm not saying, I know I'm saying this in a jokey fashion, but it's the truth. I mean, yeah. Maybe I'm just blackpilling. Who knows? But
well, I mean, they also.
I know I'm saying
no, I mean, but think about the fact that they also. I mean, they grew up in a time where, 2 years of their life were taken away from them as well. Or whatever comes after Gen Z too. They're also talking about it too. Where like I started this stuff, in 8th grade or whatever. Now I'm entering my sophomore year of high school, and it's just like I don't know what the hell just happened, or people losing out on their college experiences. People trying to make sense of everything. So I mean, like they've got something that. Just as much as September 11th, 2001 has fundamentally transformed the world, the global war on terror, and a lot of that now coming home. They now have to deal with a biomedical security state that has the added teeth of building off of the last 20 years of warfare, surveillance, and espionage as well. And I mean, we also have to inherit that. We have the unfortunate curse of knowing this isn't the first time, and they'll do it again probably.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But do you want to get through these super chats?
Sure.
Alrighty. The first one is from Hams Sparde for $10 Australian. I'm going to try my best to read this. I bet you wouldn't have unfollowed me if I was an e-girl. Says laughing anyways. I know it wasn't nearly as good as the classic stuff, but did you see that Soitano gave the new Megadeth album a 3 out of 10? Ridiculous. 2001 was still a good year regardless. Well, what a very on-topic donation.
Whoa.
But thank you nonetheless.
Of course, F Slurf Tano would give Megadeth the new album. Like, I don't understand. I mean, it seems like him and Metal Sucks for a solid decade. It was like every day article about Dave Mustaine, how he's evil for being based in Red Pill. I listened to some of the new album. I think it's all right. I mean, I'm much more of a fan of Chris Broderick era recent Megadeth, but their Greek guitarist they got is all right. I don't understand what's so bad about the album, apart from it just being generic. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, even Megadeth had the Endgame album, right? Because of the Alex Jones documentary. I woke up in a black FEMA box. Darkness was all around me in my coffin. Yeah, so yeah, I think even Megadeth, I forget what album came after, right after 9/11. I forget which album it was. I have to look at it. Oh, well, Risk was in 99. That was terrible. It wasn't that terrible. It was a decent album, but what Megadeth album came after? I forget. Anyways, you unfollowed this person, Prude, for not being an e-girl?
I mean, I don't even know who this person is.
Oh, maybe.
Not in regards to Twitter. If they have a Twitter account, I would know it, but I don't follow any e-girls on Twitter.
No?
No, I try not to. The only ones I really see on my timeline are whoever comes my way or whatever you retweet or Marcus retweets. And
yeah, it's funny. I get that a lot. It's like, I only see e-girls when you retweet them, Gio. I go, yeah, that's true.
All the thirsty boys,
Oh boy.
All right. The next one up there is
thank you for the $10 from Australia.
George Sagan for $1.99. Have any of y'all watched or listened to News at 11? I know who that is. That's from Cat System Core. All the weird electronic music stuff that came out. 2016? That was.
I think I've heard of News at 11. Maybe.
Yeah, they definitely. It's sort of it's a project. But I would need. I know what it is. I would need to re-listen to it.
Yeah.
I know that it's a lot of sample stuff to talk about September 11th. But I will definitely go give it a listen more. And I know what it is, but I can't say that I've listened to it, so I'll be sure to give it there. But thank you nonetheless, George. It's something for me to look up now. JS for €2 says, watch The Sum of All Fears a while back. So quaint.
2 euros. That's how much American? $5 American?
It's probably like $2 now.
Nowadays,
the euro dollar parity is on for very real again. It's like 2008 all over again.
Man.
But yeah, no, Some of All Fears feels so quaint with like that post-Soviet feel. The ideas of dirty bombs falling in the hands of radical European fascist nationalists. Very, very quaint. Indeed.
We need to give.
No, we don't.
I was gonna say.
Let's not make the nuclear situation a risk.
No, I'm kidding. No, not gonna Fed post.
Let's see here. I'm scrolling through so I can put them up on.
Think if Action France or Identity Europa got their shit together, but no,
God.
sorry, I'm God.
Oh Lord.
Oh man. I'm kidding.
For $5.
Cringe Walker.
Eventually, I need to write down all the biotech abominations I've seen and what they're planning. I saw a living Wi-Fi router using modified plankton.
Whoa!
I mean,
existence. Cronenberg was a visionary.
Indeed, he was. So yeah,
I say he's still
surprised.
alive, actually, but yeah,
he hasn't done anything recently, has he?
He did. He cameoed in the Disappearance 9/11 film. I'm sorry, Disappearance of Clifton Hill, and he did. His son's also a filmmaker.
Yeah, I know his son is a filmmaker, and I know that in the same way that like Stephen King's son is a writer as well. He did The Black Phone too, which was actually really good. I quite enjoyed it.
Antiviral was a great film by Brandon. What's his name? Zach or Brandon Cronenberg? I forget. Yeah, it was filmed near me too. It was filmed in Hamilton. Oh, so yeah,
there you go. But yeah, Cringe Walker has all sorts of horrific science stories that I definitely come to mind.
Cringe Walker. We should get them together and put them in Cringe Walker Ranch. But it'll be like a FEMA camp for horrid abominations.
Yeah.
David Frum will be there. Oh, sorry.
George Sagan for $9.99. Thank you again.
Sagan.
But
Thank you for $9.99.
He says, I remember after 9/11, there was a standing ovation at my theater for Behind Enemy Lines. Gene Hackman was on the chopper shooting up Serbians. It was basically globalism, the movie.
Behind Enemy Lines was that. Yeah, it was like the evil Serbians doing war crimes and trying to hide it. And was it with Owen Wilson? Or what's his name? Like trying to get the data for the war crimes. Yeah.
I think so. Behind. I'm just going to Google it here real quick.
That film was totally unrealistic because the American government just makes up evidence for war crimes. So they don't really need to sacrifice troops.
Yeah, Owen Wilson, Gene Hackman, David Keith. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I love the guy that looked like he was like the Serbian sniper hunting him down. He kind of looked like Nico Bellic from GTA 4.
He was in he was also he was recently in one of the Mission Impossible movies.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, he still has an acting career for sure.
Yeah. Did you ever see that Vice documentary on the Serbian sniper?
No, I did not.
It was in Mariupol. Yeah, that was in like 2014. He's still there, eh? I don't know if he still helps the Russians, but yeah, he's still there.
Definitely. Funny how all those things from 2014 have all come back into relevance.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, George, thank you. I think that's definitely something to keep in mind, that the culture definitely has a sort of standing ovation style for stuff like that. But I mean,
because
the movie came out in 2001.
Okay, so it's sort of like, yeah, but it's about Serbia. It's not. American patriotism, I guess. Yeah.
I mean, you have to understand, like the drive to actually go to war and the drive to actually pick up, and do something had never been higher in the history of the United States, maybe except the Civil War for localities and such.
That's what sunk Muhammad Hassan's wrestling career, by the way, was the Undertaker storyline. You remember that one?
No, I don't. This wrestling is not my thing. It never has been.
Yeah.
So I really do rely on you and AA to keep me abreast.
Yeah, they did this storyline where Mark Capani, who is a fellow Italian, but in wrestling, Italians can either play American indigenous people or Arabs besides being Italian. So Mark Capani was an OVW. He was with the original class, like Randy Orton, John Cena. They gave him a Muslim character.
Oh,
but
Lord.
of course, his manager Davari was Persian, so it was kind of like legit, right? So Muhammad Hassan becomes this big thing. And originally the storyline was pretty good. It was pretty like, it was around like, I want to say 2005. So it was sort of like he was admonishing America for anti-Muslim racism, which I mean at the time was kind of needed, right? They could have done something interesting with that. But then it devolved into like everyone hating him because he's a Muslim. And then what happened was what killed his career was they did this storyline where they were going to put the belt on him, actually, behind the scenes, right? They booked him into this program with The Undertaker, who was a champion at the time. They did a storyline where The Undertaker is like blindsided in the ring on SmackDown, if I recall, and a bunch of masked men that looked like Taliban members come into the ring and beat him up with chains, and they lift up their manager Davari, and they have this like Christ-like pose. This happened the day that it happened. The 2 bombings happened. So Vince McMahon was in panic mode. He's like, what are we going to do? So they had to censor the episode from England because SmackDown was pre-recorded. So they couldn't show it in England, right, in the UK. They got total heat for this storyline. And like literally the Royal Rumble after that was happening the same month, they like had to get rid of Muhammad Hassan. They just totally wrote him off. Like Undertaker powerbombed him through the stage. That was it. He was done. And his career was ruined because of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So much different time in the 2000s. Yeah. The ratings would have been insane. I mean, the ratings were insane at the time, but the Muhammad Hassan storyline, look it up. You can still find YouTube clips. And Davari would come out like screaming in Arabic.
Oh,
like
Lord.
His managers.
Oh, boy.
Oh, man. And then Scott Steiner did the thing. It was terrible. It was terrible.
I can only imagine.
Yeah.
The next one is for $10 from New
$10
Gloff.
by my good friend New Gloff.
All right, so since we're talking about 9/11 and the neocons, can you guys break down the link between Trotskyism and neoconservatism?
Oh, this is your
happily,
forte.
New Gloff. If you want sort of a really good introduction, you can look up an archived article from John B. Judas. This came out in 1995. Trotskyism to anachronism, the neoconservative revolution, to which John B. Judas outlines much of the characteristics of neoconservatism have their roots based on Trotskyist thinking, and that many former prominent neoconservatives of the time were also ex-Trotskyists.
Yeah.
But this isn't just from John B. Judas, for instance. If you want more liberals that want to make this claim, Francis Fukuyama had famously derided a lot of the foreign policy of the George W. Bush administration and their hawkishness to be Trotskyist and Leninist in nature. He had made that argument, I think, in 2000, in the mid 2000s during the Bush administration. Also, Michael B. Lind, who is a well-known sort of like, New Dealer type of like liberal nationalist American. Yeah. He had also
Morgenthau liberal.
It's exactly the word that you would want to use. Lind's, he had said that a lot of the defense intellectuals at the time are largely from the Trotskyist movement. It had been primarily what he believed to be just really that the key aspects of the George W. Bush administration. Yeah. But the idea that, this ever-changing world that needs to continuously pursue change, and the idea that revolution needs to happen, and put it into constant change to build up the world, to make it safe for democracy, to revolutionize the world, for every nation to be built up in that altar of democracy, almost from the old style form of Trotskyite proletarian internationalism, is where you do see a lot of the complaints and and characteristics being shared by the Trotskyists and neoconservatives. And I mean, who better than to sort of see this as well than to watch the, Lord have mercy on him, but to watch Christopher Hitchens go to bat for the interventions in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Who was a Trotskyist?
Who was a Trotskyist? I mean, and you get the prodigal son, Peter Hitchens, who is like, yeah, I was a Trotskyist, and now I'm just like a very diehard, Anglican conservative. And I mean, so yeah, there's a lot there. And one of these days, I should probably do one of my regular shows. I should cover this in more depth. But I mean, this is also a big part of what Keith Woods covers in his Council of Foreign Relations video.
Yeah, and on the political right, of course, why does his name escape my mind? He's one of the greatest scholars. After liberalism, I can't believe. Oh my
God, Paul
Gottfried. Yeah, Paul Gottfried, I believe, also outlined how the neocons, how they were Trotskyites. Of course, there was also a number of
he also talks about that
ethnic lines between them too. But
he talks about it extensively in his two books, Fascism and Anti-Fascism. About sort of the foreign policy of the U.S. having that Trotskyist line from being anti-fascist globally. It's where you see it a lot in the neoconservatives. Like, you just need to, if there's anyone I'm going to tell you to throw the book at you and tell you to read to the audience, it's just like, please read it. What almost everything that Paul Gottfried has ever written.
Has come true. Or is spot on. Like, what was his book, Fascism, History of a Concept? Was that the title?
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't know he wrote a book about anti-fascism. I should read. Well,
that one is the one I would really recommend people to read, because it's just
after liberalism, of course.
Yeah, I mean, you have to read After Liberalism. That's sort of just it's all required reading.
If you want, and actually, me and Keith, maybe one day, me and Keith Woods, me and on Joel Davis' channel, him, and our good friend Owen broke down After Liberalism in, I believe, 2 parts, two videos. Yeah. So go check that one out. So the neocons, I mean, even nowadays you could see it, like the woke turn, quote unquote, of like people like David Frum and Jennifer. Oh no, I'm not gonna say what Back calls her, but
you're referring to Jennifer Rubin.
Jennifer Rubin, Jen N-word Rubin. That's what he says on the Caribbean Rhythms. You could easily see how like them, Bill Kristol, the Lulkin Project, how they how they sort of embraced like Obama to Joe Biden era politics.
Yeah.
Very easily. And sort of Trump representing, at least nominally, the sort of revival of paleoconservatism a little bit. I mean, in name only, but yeah, more or less. I mean, yeah. But no, the Trotsky, even the Straussians, like people like Bloom would talk about the neocons.
For sure.
Yeah. But because you could see it though, like international communism, international liberalism, like how they share like a lot of similar conclusions about the proper state of mankind.
And I mean, if you ever want to see it written in like it's in like full blatant naked honesty, who wrote that book? Douglas Murray, right? About why he's a neoconservative. I mean, it's kind of just there dripping on the pages.
Yeah.
But, I will probably dedicate a researched lecture and stream about the Trotskyist roots of neoconservatism. Mm-hmm. So thank you there, Nukloff. I now have a new research project to do. But the next one is from TB88 from $10. Thank you so much.
$10.
I remember hearing about Saddam persecuting Christians as a kid. Ironic that after the invasions, the Syrians fled Iraq, and many of them went to Syria, only to get round 2 of American liberation. And of course, with the Islamic State killing thousands of them and raising churches that have been around since like the 1st century.
Yeah.
Truly depressing.
That was a total American lie, by the way. Saddam actually helped protect a lot of Christians in the Middle East. Really, Iraq was one of the only states that Christians could live in peace. Well, apart from, I guess, Udi Hassan. Count Dankula has a video on his son, Udi Hussein. So, really, Iraq, I mean, for like compared to their neighbors, they sort of were like the quote unquote progressive Ba'athist regime that gave a lot of leeway to both Christians and that other religion. But of course, America destroyed that. So, well,
Yeah, I mean,
which is kind of funny though, how people talk about like the crusade thing on the political left against Bush, because if anything, you could say that America did more to destabilize the state of Christianity in the Middle East than anyone else. I mean, really, honestly, if we're being honest with ourselves.
Yeah, I mean the diaspora of those that still speak Aramaic has been. It's just it is a tragedy in that regard to know that some of the earliest Christian churches have been uprooted and don't exist.
Even in Lebanon, I mean, Hezbollah, controversially to say this, I mean, even Hezbollah gave protection to Christians against the bombings by that one nation in the Middle East. So,
well, yeah, and I mean, even Lebanon has its whole post-Civil War constitution and government system is designed for representation between the Christians,
Maronites,
totally. That's how it is.
Yeah.
But let's see. Marcos 588 for Australian 299. Furious seething again 2 nights in a row now. Well, I guess someone else called him out yesterday about his unquenchable Mediterranean thirst, but I can't.
Oh boy,
it's in his blood.
You know what's funny? I can't believe Academic Agent, he added Furious this take about us Italians always talking too much and being eccentric and high strung. That really, like, people like to think that African American culture is like that, but really us Italians probably imported that to America. I can't believe AA would say that. How dare he? Anyways, go ahead.
But yeah, no, I mean,
it's probably true, but I mean,
I love Furious. He's great. In fact, he's going to be on this. He's going to be on this Sunday. We're going to talk about what's happening between Turkey and Greece and the Aegean Sea. So, we love our meds. We truly do. We love our meds.
We love our meds, folks.
Yeah, we love our meds, folks. We have the best meds, the best.
It just reminds me how Trump, I forget who said it, like, still has like latent memory of like the older, like old world mindset. Like, didn't he get in trouble for calling something the paddy wagon?
Something like that, yeah.
Because his older Irish heritage, yeah.
Well, that or like the other, like what was it back when Hillary Clinton was running for office and like she got awkwardly in trouble for using the phrase "colored people time."
Oh God, yeah.
So definitely, it definitely says a lot for sure.
It reminds me of this line. I'm reading Dan Baltic's novel to do the forward.
Oh, you're doing? Oh, okay, good. Because he asked me to do the blurb.
Yeah, I know it's a wild read, man.
It's a
wild read. Yeah.
The first like 5 pages, I was like, "What am I reading?"
Yeah, but you'll see it's to spoof like that.
Oh, I know. It's, I'm halfway through it. I'm quite enjoying.
And he
it
he like gets with this like liberal slam pig. It's hilarious, man. It's hilarious.
Yeah.
Go to a pussy hat march.
But yeah. But with that is all the super chats. So we'll get to as we wrap up here before we hit the 3-hour mark. Gio, is there anything that you would like to promote?
Had a great discussion with Ryag Nationalist. We talk about his new book, The Eggs Benedict Option, but of course we get into more of a theory cell discussion as to what he's used to. We talk about the works of James C. Scott and Giorgio Agamben. And it's great on my YouTube channel, Jenner Productions. I'm almost at 4K subs, so please subscribe if you haven't already. It's right there, Janet Productions, youtube.com/Janet Productions. Go to Patreon. This week will be the final installment of my review of Psychopolitics. I believe I've already done 7 hours on this book. So hopefully I can get, it's all their Janet reviews. And also the next Janet reviews will probably be about the essay, The Future Doesn't Need Us, I think it's called. So, thank you, Pacioli. How do I say your name? Mr. Pacioli. I think Pacioli. I think that's how you say it. It was great. So please subscribe. Get me at 4K subs. Hopefully one day I can approximate the subs that I built on that other podcast, but we'll see. Probably soon. Prue, you're almost at 8K subs, no?
Yeah, I'm getting pretty close. I'm doing quite well.
Nice.
Also, courtesy of Charlemagne, Gio is now on findmyfriends.net. He is linked down below in the description.
Thank you, Charlemagne. Thank you so much.
So,
Thank you.
That way, in case Linktree ever decides to cancel your butt like they did like American Krogan and everyone else, you have the uncancelable findmyfriends.net.
Amazing. Gio isn't being through enough.
Isn't being thorough enough on that review. And you've been 7 hours into that book?
Hours.
Yeah, I think you're doing great.
Yeah. No, also I'm in the process of centralizing all of my article, like all my podcast appearances and everything. And I recently recorded amazing 3-hour discussion with Scott Mannion for the Greenwood channel. We talk about Heidegger and the work of art. We talk about memes, talk about the Paul Cell meme, and also Dark Brandon. So looking forward to that. We did a great discussion. I had to reread some of my notes on Heidegger's poetry language thought. So Gio, I DM'd you about part 5 review on Twitter. You mentioned Bataille's Social Matter article in passing, wanted title. I will find it, although you have to go to the Wayback Machine, because the people that ran Social Matter, they yeeted it, or they went. I'll find it. I'll try to find it. But if you go to the Wayback Machine, Mr. Pacioli, go to Social Matter, the most recent cap of Social Matter, the website. Just type in Bataille, you will find it. I'll look it up for you. I'll try to look it up for you. Yeah. Pronunciation of my name is great, Mr. Pacioli. Pacioli. Yeah. Sorry.
No worries.
Yeah.
But is anything else, Gio?
No, that's my shilling. Next week I don't know who I'm gonna have on. Maybe I'll release the Zoomer Schopenhauer the Marcus episode.
Oh, that'll be good.
Yeah.
We
talk about his essays in Firstness Journal, which is run by Joel Davis and Mike from Imperial Press. Also, I have to get back to Dave Bizarchives to be on him and Mike's show. So.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah.
Great.
You have anything? What's
yeah, I've got a few things lined up. So just going through my upcoming here on YouTube. So this Sunday, I'll have our good friend Furious on. We're going to talk about the recent stuff on the Aegean Sea. After that, this coming Friday, the 23rd, I'll have an interview with T.R. Hudson about his book, Automaton, and get a chance to talk about writing and things like that. And also that Wednesday, the 21st, so this is all next week. It'll be very busy for you all. The recent thread from Pedro Gonzalez and everyone else's reactions to it. I'm going to have Patrick Casey on to talk about the state of the dissident right and where he thinks things are going, and his thoughts, considering he's been playing the game a lot longer than some of us. So I think that'll be a very good discussion.
I want to talk to him one day about that. Maybe put in a good word for me.
I
don't know if he likes me, though. I think he blocked me on one of his. No, was he out of ism on Twitter? No, he was someone else. Maybe it wasn't Patrick Casey.
But yeah, and then Steve is telling me in chat, check out the Stephen Wertheim interview over at Foreign Policy titled "Is America Overextending Itself?" I'll definitely look into that. It sounds good. Maybe I'll do a review of that article for my patrons. Also, speaking of patrons, this Saturday at 12 p.m. Eastern, we'll be going over the essay from Robert Filmer, Patriarcha, courtesy of Imperial Press. We'll just go over the first essay, Patriarcha, and then we'll probably subsequently go through the rest of them. It's been quite good. So if you are a patron on Subscribestar, then you will have access to it. I will post this week, or I will post today up there on Subscribestar for how you guys can access it and join us. It'll be great. And but yeah, that's what I've got definitely going on for this week. Not to mention, I've got to finish reading Dan Baltic's book and learn how to put together a blurb for it.
Yeah, so I'm almost done. I'm done it. Yeah.
I'm quite enjoying it though. It's very good. It did surprise me at the beginning, but it's a lot. It grew on me as I kept reading it.
Yeah, book reviews are sort of like an excuse to read stuff like that you want to read, but if you're making content out of it, like recently, I bought the 2-volume book Schizoculture, which was the 80s conference where all of the original continental thinkers came to America, like Deleuze and Foucault. And it's really wild too, because they have like drawings and like medical texts in the middle of it. It's really amazing. Yeah. Also, I'll probably do a general review on the one essay by the art critic Arthur Dano in the second volume about Sigmund Freud and Freudian schizophrenia. But yeah, Zach says you got to give up fasting, just diet, and go to the gym for best results. I don't know, but people say fasting is for best results. So I don't know. Are you a Ray Peter, Zach? Are you a Peter? Listen. The only I shouldn't say I'm not going to alienate people, but the only Peter I trust is Landshark. That's pretty much it. There's other people that are into Ray Pete that don't like me. I can click, but I just don't buy into the thesis that a lot of sugar is good for you. I've been down that road. I should be like, nah, anyways, I don't know. I'm not.
I'm sorry. I loved this. And Zoomers can't read. That's why Skeptical Waves is so popular.
Yeah, very true. Very true.
Well, there you go. And if you're not subscribed to Skeptical Waves, you should.
Yeah,
the audio work that he does is fantastic. But next week, the show, of course, will be on Gio's channel, just so everyone knows who's new and stops by. That's what we do every week. We alternate and keep things going. So we'll be live next Thursday over at Gio's channel, and things will be great.
I wonder what we'll talk about.
We always figure it out. Yeah. We'll figure it out. Who knows who we might even have on. But
yeah, we could have a guest on, maybe.
Yeah, who knows? But with that, we'll wrap up for this evening. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Greatly appreciate it. We'll see you all next time.
God bless. Goodbye. Too sweet.
See ya.